Chapter 32-24. Yan Tiangang suspected that someone had sneaked into the divine palace to search for treasures. However, when he thought about it, even he did not dare to do so. Who would be so bold? Did they have a death wish? He was certain it was not someone from Great Yan's imperial family. As for the other 9 sects and aristocratic families, they should not be so arrogant. His priority now was to calm the agitated experts and stabilize the situation. As expected, his plan worked. The experts from the 40 factions calmed down and looked at Yan Tiangang in unison. Someone asked loudly, "Patriarch Yan, it's not that we don't believe you, but the truth is right before our eyes. We need an explanation." Someone shouted, "Patriarch Yan, we're allies. We have to enter the divine palace together and investigate the truth. Only then can we convince the masses. If the 10 great sects and aristocratic families enter the divine palace to investigate, we won't believe the results of your investigation without witnessing it with our own eyes." Hearing these words, countless divine lord powerhouses voiced their agreement. Clearly, the 40 factions were causing a ruckus because they wanted to enter the Green Jade Divine Palace. In truth, the truth and outcome of the matter were not that important. Yan Tiangang understood this as well, but there was nothing he could do. If he did not allow the 40 factions to enter the Divine Palace, the more than 10,000 people would definitely go crazy and cause a great disaster. However, if they were allowed to enter, the 20,000 people would swarm into the Divine Palace, and it would be even more chaotic. It would be difficult for the 10 great sects and aristocratic families to obtain any treasures. They might even return empty-handed. When he thought about this, Yan Tiangang felt a headache coming on. He frowned as he thought of a solution. At this moment, Yi Wuji, the sect master of heavenly unity, stepped forward and said with a dignified expression, "Don't worry, everyone. For the sake of fairness, all the factions can enter the divine palace and investigate the truth together. However, everyone knows that this is the Green Jade Divine King's cave abode. Only high-ranked divine lords can enter the divine palace safely and effectively. Those below that realm won't be able to find any clues even if they enter the divine palace. Their lives might even be in danger. Moreover, if everyone swarms in, it'll definitely cause chaos and cause more trouble." When Yi Wuji said this, the experts of the dozens of forces all understood what he meant. The divine lords of the various factions agreed with this statement and were willing to accept it. However, someone raised a question. "Sect Master Yi, what you said makes sense. We are all willing to accept it. However, for the sake of fairness, the 10 great sects and aristocratic families must also be treated equally." This person's meaning was that the 40 factions would only send powerhouses above middle-level divine lords to enter the divine palace to investigate the truth. The remaining elite forces were left outside the gates of the divine palace. The top 10 sects and clans should also do the same. They should let their disciples stay outside the divine palace and only allow the strong ones to enter. This request was approved by dozens of factions. Countless divine lord powerhouses also voiced their agreement. Yi Wuji furrowed his brows. He looked displeased and his eyes were cold. However, under the watchful eyes of so many people, he could not flare up and could only forcefully suppress his anger. At this moment, Yan Tiangang spoke, agreeing to this condition. "Everyone, don't worry. Sect Master Ye's suggestion is reasonable. Naturally, everyone will abide by it and treat everyone equally." Yan Tiangang's reply could be considered as a final decision. The matter was thus decided. The elite forces and disciples of the various forces all stopped outside the gate of the divine palace and waited patiently. All of the high divine lords, regardless of whether they were injured or not, hurried to gather at the gates of the divine palace. More than 300 high divine lords were divided into 50 teams. It was clear that there were more than 10 high divine lords from each of the top 10 sects and clans. As for the 40 ordinary factions, there were usually only 3 to 5 high divine lords. A few could reach 6 or 7. After the 50 teams had gathered, everyone was filled with anticipation. Yan Tiangang did not waste any time. He said to the elite forces of the dozens of factions, "All of you stay outside the divine palace. No matter what, don't enter the divine palace to avoid any accidents." Then he looked at the high divine lords around him. He waved his hand and ordered, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he extended his palms and released his divine power, pushing open the gates of the divine palace. Creak, creak, creak. With a series of muffled sounds, the tall gates opened to both sides, revealing a wide gate. Yan Tiangang led the 15 high divine lords of the great Yan imperial family through the gate and into the Green Jade Palace. Immediately after, the experts of the top 10 sects and clans entered the Green Jade Palace as well. Naturally, the high divine lords of the 40 factions could not fall behind. They immediately followed. More than 300 high divine lords flew majestically through the air, heading straight for the plaza and the main hall. Although most of the high divine lords were heavily injured and weak, they were able to enter the divine palace. However, they were able to enter the divine palace as they wished. Their spirits were lifted and they were very excited. After entering the divine palace, they looked around and observed with curiosity and anticipation. The intricacies and layout of the divine palace filled them with anticipation and admiration. The high divine lords also coveted the gemstones used in the plaza and the stone path. Many people stopped in their tracks. They took out their weapons and tools and started digging for the gemstones and gemstones. This scene caused Yan Tiangang, Yi Wuji and the others to shake their heads inwardly. They sneered disdainfully. The experts of the top 10 sects and clans also had expressions of disdain and mockery on their faces. Just as they passed through the plaza and were about to enter the main hall to investigate the situation, a deafening sound came from the palaces behind the main hall. Pitch-black cold air surged into the sky. Violent shockwaves swept through the surrounding palaces. More than half of Green Jade Divine Palace violently shook a few more times. This situation caused the 300 high divine lords to tense up. They all looked towards the depths of the divine palace. Let's go and see what's going on. Yan Tiangang immediately made a decision. He gave up on investigating the main hall and headed straight for the source of the sound. He led the way, and the divine lords of the dozens of factions followed him into the depths of the divine palace. Interestingly, there were only 120 high divine lords flying towards the location of the incident. The remaining 200 high divine lords remained in the plaza and did not leave. They were all heavily injured and looked very wretched. They were also very weak. These people knew their limits and did not investigate the situation at all. Instead, they stayed in the plaza and dug for gemstones. The 200 or so people began to dig as quickly as they could. The originally clean and tidy plaza, which was flickering with divine light, was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, Yan Tiangang led the 120 high divine lords to Green Jade Divine King's residence. More than half of the residence had already collapsed and turned into ruins. A pitch-black hole could be seen amidst the ruins. Black cold air constantly poured out of it. There were low roars of beasts and loud booms coming from the hole. Chapter 32:25. Hearing the roar from underground, Yan Tiangang and the others' expressions changed. The experts looked at each other, the same thought appearing in their minds. Could it be that the roar from underground belongs to the guardian beast of Green Jade Palace? Some bastard snuck into the palace and was discovered by the guardian beast, causing them to fight? Based on the current situation, this conjecture was the most logical. Almost all of the Divine Lord experts were certain of this answer. Yan Tiangang waved his hand without hesitation and ordered, "Everyone follow." As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized dark gold heavy sword and led the way into the pitch-black hole in the ruins. The dozen or so experts of the imperial family hurriedly followed. The high divine lords of the various sects and families also took out their weapons and followed into the hole. The pitch-black hole was originally a narrow passage that connected to an underground secret room. However, the passage had long since collapsed and was filled with rocks. The ground was also filled with cracks. Yan Tiangang and the other Divine Lord experts used the earth escape technique and followed the broken passage to 1,000 feet underground. What appeared in front of them was a pitch-black stone door that was filled with cracks. Everyone knew at a glance that there was definitely a secret room behind this stone door. And the source of the fighting also came from here. After all, the low roars and explosions as well as the endless black cold air, all came from the cracks in the stone door. Yan Tiangang swung his sword and sent out dozens of light blades that slashed at the black stone door, wanting to break it open. However, the bright sword lights all collapsed. The stone door shook violently a few times but did not shatter. Seeing this, Yan Tiangang could not help but frown and say, "The material of this secret room's stone door is a quasi-king level divine item. It is abnormally precious. With my strength, I am unable to break it open." We can only break the array on the stone door to open the door to this secret room. Yi Wuji and the other sect masters and patriarchs took turns to test it. The result was obvious. If even Yan Tiangang could not break open the stone door, they would not be able to either. Helpless, the top experts could only patiently study the divine array on the stone door and find a way to break it. More than 100 high divine lords also spread out underground, surrounding the stone door. Everyone clenched their swords and Kenshin soldiers. They held their breaths and prepared for battle. Meanwhile, in the boundless darkness, Ji Tianxing was still dealing with the black beast. The black ferocious beast had entered a berserk state and was attacking ferociously without stopping. It was impossible for it to regain its rationality in a short period of time. Perhaps, it would only calm down when its divine power was exhausted. In the beginning, Ji Tianxing had planned to use his sealing ability to suppress the violent black beast. However, he discovered that the black ferocious beast was too violent, and its strength was too shocking. Without half a day to a day, it would be very difficult for him to suppress the black ferocious beasts. Soon after, he detected that Yan Tiangang and the others were rushing into the Green Jade Palace. There were a total of more than 300 high-level divine lords, and most of them were heavily injured. They remained in the plaza and the surroundings of the main hall, busy searching for treasures. The remaining 120 or so high-level divine lords were all perfectly preserved. Under Yan Tiangong's lead, they headed straight for the underground chamber. Seeing this situation, Ji Tianxing changed his strategy without hesitation. He no longer used arts to suppress the ferocious beast. Instead, he explored the divine formation in the darkness and observed the dozen or so chains of purple light. That's right. This dark space was formed by several king-level divine formations. The incomparably powerful power of the formations gathered into a dozen or so chains of purple light that firmly bound the black ferocious beast. Because of the chains of purple light, the black ferocious beast could only stay in the darkness and could not leave this space. Once those chains of purple light broke and disappeared, the black ferocious beast would lose its restraints. The consequences would be unimaginable. And what Ji Tianxing needed to do was to destroy those chains of purple light. He keenly discovered that the chains of purple light were somewhat dim and their power was also somewhat weak. Clearly, after 10,000 years, the divine formation that maintained this dark space was weakening. As the black ferocious beast struggled, the chains of purple light swayed incessantly, their light flickering. Without a doubt, the chains of purple light were rapidly depleting their power. Ji Tianxing quickly saw the structure of the divine formation and understood the origin of the chains of purple light as well as the routes of power transmission. Therefore, he avoided the attacks of the black ferocious beast as he used arts to break the divine formation. Swish, swish, swish. He formed a divine art with both hands and continuously sent out tens of thousands of dazzling divine light into the divine formation. One by one, the veins of the formation were severed by him. The energy transmission routes of the chains of purple light were also severed by him. The dozen or so chains of purple light were dimming at a speed visible to the naked eye. Their power was also weakening rapidly. In a short 100 breaths of time, the first chain of purple light disappeared. Then the second chain of purple light also dimmed and gradually dissipated. As time passed, the chains of purple light disappeared one after another. The black ferocious beast was no longer bound and became even more violent. Its power was no longer suppressed and its attacks became even more ferocious. Half an hour later, Ji Tianxing severed 10 chains of purple light in succession. The last 4 chains were tied to the black ferocious beast's legs and waist. Ji Tianxing stopped casting arts and muttered to himself, "With its strength, it will be able to break the remaining 4 chains of purple light very quickly." On the other hand, Yan Tiangang and the group of divine lords outside the stone door are really disappointing. Half an hour has passed and they still haven't figured out the formation on the stone door. No, I have to help them in order to complete this show. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a mocking sneer as he turned around and flew towards the stone door at the edge of the darkness. He formed a divine art with both hands and sent out tens of thousands of divine light into the stone door. He had broken the divine formation on this stone door before. At this moment he waved his hand and cast arts, directly closing the divine formation on the stone door. Without the protection of the divine formation, the pitch-black stone door was incomparably fragile and was immediately pushed open by Yan Tiangang and the others. Whoosh! The stone door opened wide and a wild black cold energy gushed out like a flood, drowning the many divine lords present. Yan Tiangang and the other experts were shocked. They instinctively retreated and used all their strength to resist the cold energy's invasion. Most of the divine lords were lucky enough to survive. Only a dozen or so unlucky divine lords were frozen into dregs by the black cold energy and shattered into fine powder on the ground. This result caused the divine lords' hearts to palpitate and they were extremely terrified. After everyone calmed down, Yan Tiangang led a large group of experts through the stone door and into the dark space. At this time, Xianxia had already entered stealth mode and was hiding in a corner of the dark space. Yan Tiangang and the other divine lords' minds were a little chaotic after the attack just now. They were only focused on searching and guarding against the guardian divine beasts and didn't notice Xianxia's existence at all. Chapter 32-26. Yan Tiangang led the many Sir Gods through the stone door and into the dark space. Everyone scanned the area with their divine senses and saw a black ferocious beast that was 10 meters tall in the depths of the darkness. That ferocious beast was very similar to the god race. It had 4 limbs, a head and a pair of wings on its back. However, its body was covered in thick and hard fur. There were also barbs on its back and shoulders. Looked very ferocious and terrifying. Yan Tiangang and the 100 Sir Gods couldn't possibly equate it with the god race. When everyone saw the appearance of the black ferocious beast, they were all stunned. They revealed strange expressions and exclaimed, "Found it! It's over there. This is the guardian divine beast of Green Jade Palace? Why doesn't it look like it? Which divine beast isn't majestic? How can it be like this one? It looks so ferocious and terrifying. We have misunderstood. That's not the guardian divine beast. It's a ferocious beast that was suppressed here. Yes. This dark space is formed by the divine array. Look at that ferocious beast. There are still a few divine light chains on its body restricting its movements." The Sir Gods only saw it clearly after a few top experts pointed it out. That black ferocious beast was indeed chained and its movements were restricted. It was in a frenzy, releasing deathly cold energy and divine power with all its might. It was attacking randomly without any pattern. At the same time, it was still trying to break free from the divine light chains with all its might. Yan Tiangang and the 100 Sir Gods all entered the dark space. Everyone held their weapons warily and formed a huge encirclement around the black ferocious beast. The black ferocious beast also sensed the abnormality and sensed danger approaching. It stopped attacking randomly and started to retract its divine power. It stared at the Sir Gods with murderous intent and took a defensive stance. Yan Tiangang wasn't in a hurry to attack. He still released his divine sense to search the dark space. The ferocious beast is suppressed here. It wouldn't go berserk for no reason and it wouldn't destroy the passage outside the stone door. Someone must have barged in and angered the ferocious beast. However, where is the intruder? Yan Tiangang insisted that a top Sir God expert had barged into Green Jade Palace and fought with the ferocious beast here. However, no matter how hard he searched, he could not find any trace of the pair. Yi Wuji and the leaders of the large sects and families also released their immortal will and searched the entire dark space with secret arts. In the end, they searched the entire dark space within a radius of 10,000 miles, but they still couldn't find Xianxia. When no one was paying attention, Xianxia quietly moved to the exit. As long as he crossed the broken stone door, he would be able to leave the dark space. However, even though Yan Tiangang hadn't sensed his aura, his sixth sense had taken effect. He vaguely felt a little strange and turned his head to look at the stone door. Xianxia hurriedly stopped and held his breath, trying his best to restrain his soul and aura to avoid being detected by Yan Tiangang. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the black beast helped Xianxia. It struggled with all its might and finally broke the purple light chain that was tied to its ankle. Crack! With a crisp explosion, the 100-mile-long chain of purple light shattered into pieces and scattered into the darkness. There were only 2 chains left on the black beast's body and they were tied to its waist. Its seal had been lifted further and its power had been released to a greater extent, so it struggled even more fiercely. The remaining 2 chains of purple light were also trembling violently and flashing with divine light. It wouldn't be long before those 2 chains also broke. By then the black beast would be free and would definitely start a massacre. Thinking of this, Yan Tiangang dispelled the doubts in his heart. He no longer cared about the abnormality at the stone door and focused all his attention on the black beast. That beast will soon break free. Once it regains its freedom, it will definitely start a massacre. We must strike first to gain the initiative. We must not give it a chance to kill. Everyone, let's kill it first. Yi Wuji and the leaders of the other sects also had the same idea. Judging by how fierce and bloodthirsty that beast was, it would definitely kill the innocent after it regained its freedom. So they might as well strike first and gain the upper hand. So many divine lords agreed with Yan Tiangong's order. Everyone, let's attack together. That beast is very strong. We must work together to kill it. If we don't kill it, we will definitely suffer heavy casualties. Kill. Following the shouts of the experts, the 100 or so upper divine lords all brandished their divine weapons and began to surround and attack the black ferocious beast. Swish, 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 swish. Many divine lords used their ultimate skills and exploded with vast divine power, releasing divine art light that blotted out the sky. Thousands of sword and saber lights and crisscrossing divine art phantoms enveloped the black beast like a flood. No matter how strong the black beast was, it couldn't withstand the combined attack of more than 100 high-level divine lords. At this moment of life and death, the black beast became even angrier and more violent. Its eyes turned scarlet and seemed to be on fire. It was completely enraged and its mind was completely taken over by anger and killing intent. Unless it killed all the divine lords present, its anger would not be quelled. Facing the divine art phantoms that blotted out the sky, it retreated as fast as it could. At the same time, it cleverly used the 2 purple light chains to protect itself. Bam, bam, bam. In the next instant, hundreds of Abhijina's light projections blasted it, shattering the purple chains into pieces. Even though it was sent flying, it only suffered light injuries. However, the 2 purple light chains binding it were completely destroyed. Without its restraints, it regained its freedom and its strength reached its maximum. When the divine art phantoms once again attacked, it let out a murderous roar and launched a counterattack. Swish. Black light flashed. The black beast vanished from its original spot and appeared 500 miles away, teleporting behind several divine lords. Swish. Blood flashed. The black beast waved its razor-sharp claws and swept them at the divine lords. Those divine lords couldn't dodge in time and were torn to pieces by its claws. Countless pieces of flesh and blood flew as shrill screams echoed in the darkness. Stimulated by the blood and slaughter, the black beast became even more frenzied and its strength reached its maximum. It once again teleported away, dodging the attacks of the crowd. Then it began to attack the several high divine lords 100 miles away. Many divine lords were scared out of their wits. They cried out in alarm and dodged in panic. Only Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the major sects were able to remain calm. They continued to close in on the black beast and locked onto its divine soul aura. Soon they found an opportunity to attack and decisively attacked the black beast. Chapter 32:27. The black beast was surrounded by Yan Tiangang and the others. It was temporarily stopped. It charged left and right with all its might, but it was unable to break through the encirclement of so many experts. However, this result did not excite them. Because before this, the 2 sides had only fought for a short while, and more than 20 upper divine lords had died under the claws of the black beast. Its strength was extremely terrifying, even stronger than the peak divine lord Yan Tiangang. It could be said that it had already surpassed the divine lord realm. However, it had not reached the divine king realm. Right now, it was between the divine lord realm and the divine king realm, so it was difficult to estimate its strength. In short, it was extremely dangerous. The 70 or so upper divine lords who had survived all had grave expressions and were filled with worry. However, the battle had already begun and they could not retreat. Right now, they could only follow Yan Tiangang and the other leaders and attack the black beast with all their strength. Everyone used all their strength and unleashed their ultimate moves, wanting to tear the black beast into pieces. The black beast was not simple either. It unleashed power comparable to a divine king and used the dark space within 10,000 miles to create a huge black whirlpool to protect itself. Many divine arts released by the divine lords were swallowed by the black whirlpool and were unable to harm it. Under the encirclement of so many divine lords, it stubbornly held on for 100 breaths, and its injuries continued to worsen. However, in the end it still found an opening. At the cost of being heavily injured, it successfully broke through the encirclement, leaving behind a sky full of black blood. Whoosh! Once the black beast broke free, it could no longer be encircled. It moved through the dark space like a ghost, appearing and disappearing unpredictably as it attacked the divine lords with all its might. Even though Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the others tried their best to stop it, they were unable to encircle it. On the other hand, more than 20 of the 70 upper divine lords were killed. At this point, more than half of the divine lords had died, but they were still unable to kill the black beast. The surviving divine monarchs all felt anxious and hopeless. They had a bad premonition. Yan Tiangang and the other top experts quickly gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Someone suggested that they should stick together and not split up to fight against the black beast. Someone suggested retreating and not fighting in the dark. After all, this was the home ground of the black vicious beasts. There were also people who suggested to summon the 200 Sir Gods near the plaza and the main hall to provide support. However, only 2 of these suggestions were more practical and could be considered. They could either fight as a group or retreat outside to fight. When Yan Tiangang was faced with a choice, he only waited for a moment before deciding to fight as a group and defend against the black ferocious beast's attacks with all his strength. This move was indeed effective. With more than 50 high divine lords gathered together and arranged themselves into a battle formation, their power had indeed increased explosively. Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the others were 9th stage realm peak god monarchs. As the core of the battle array, they were even more powerful. No matter how the black ferocious beast attacked or how it used all sorts of divine abilities and secret arts, it was unable to kill another divine lord. Seeing this scene, the dozens of high-level divine lords heaved a sigh of relief, their hearts much calmer. However, the black beast gradually calmed down. Seeing that everyone had gathered together to defend, it stopped attacking and turned around to fly away. Shwa! It turned into a streak of black light, passed through the dark space and flew towards the stone door at the exit. The expressions of Yan Tiangang and the other divine lords changed as they cried out in alarm. Not good. It's about to escape. This is bad. There are still more than 200 divine lords outside and they are all injured. That ferocious beast is about to go on a killing spree. Quickly stop it. Once it leaves the palace and starts a massacre in the sea of clouds, the consequences will be unimaginable. The leaders of the various large forces were all flustered. As they shouted loudly, they hurriedly rushed towards the exit to execute their techniques to stop the black ferocious beast. However, the black ferocious beast's speed was extremely fast. After it passed through the stone door, it speedily flew out of the underground ruins and appeared in the sky. It was surrounded by pitch-black deathly cold air as it stood quietly in the sky, surveying the surroundings. Seeing the once familiar green jade palace turn into what it was today, its eyes dimmed a little. The once magnificent palace was now covered in dust and the divine light dimmed. The palace, which was once bustling with people and had many guards and servants, had now become dead silent and desolate. A sense of sadness welled up in its heart. It was slightly dejected as it subconsciously shook its head and muttered to itself, "Why? You have never broken your promise to anyone, but now you have broken your promise to me? Thousands of years? Tens of thousands of years? Have you forgotten the oath you once made? Why didn't you come back for me? Have you regretted it? Have you really abandoned me? Then why didn't you say so earlier? Why did you make me wait for 10,000 years?" At this moment, the black ferocious beast did not seem like a ferocious and bloodthirsty beast. It was more like a resentful woman who had been abandoned and let down. It was venting the resentment in its heart like a maniac. At the beginning, it was still muttering to itself. In the end, it had become a hysterical roar. However, not far from it was the main palace and the square in front of the palace. More than 200 divine lords had already dug up the square and turned it into ruins. Now many of the divine lords had spread out and were searching for treasures in the various palaces. They were rummaging through chests and cabinets, digging 3 feet into the ground. As they crazily searched for treasures, they left behind a mess. Suddenly, someone heard the black ferocious beast's roar and could not help but exclaim and shout to alert others. "Everyone look! There's a ferocious beast in the sky. Is that the guardian divine beast of the palace? Let's tame it and bring it back to the sect to be the guardian divine beast." "Oh my God! That's not a divine beast. It's obviously a ferocious beast. Everyone be careful. That ferocious beast's murderous aura is very strong. Many divine lords stopped searching for treasures. They took out their divine weapons and were on guard against the black ferocious beast in the sky. The ferocious beast roared a few times. After venting the resentment in its heart, its gaze landed on the many divine lords. Its eyes were cold and it muttered in a sinister tone, "You bunch of despicable thieves and greedy vermin. I'll bury all of you here." As its voice fell, it turned into a beam of black light and swept towards the square. Before the black light arrived, it had already released an earth-shattering divine power. It scattered thousands of blood-red light blades and shadows of beasts, enveloping more than 20 divine lords. The 20 divine lords were severely injured. They had a premonition that death was coming and they fled in a panic. However, their speed was still too slow. In the blink of an eye, the blood-red light blades and shadows of beasts covered the sky and the earth and drowned them. After a loud rumble, more than 20 Sir Gods were killed on the spot. Not only were their divine bodies blasted into smithereens, even their godheads were blasted into smithereens. Such a shocking scene made the surrounding 200 Sir Gods shudder in fear. They were extremely terrified. Countless people cried out in alarm and desperately retreated into the distance. However, the black ferocious beast attacked again and killed groups of divine lords at lightning speed. Chapter 32:28. The situation was just as Yen Tiangang had expected. The black beast started a massacre in the Green Jade Palace, crazily slaughtering the injured god lords. With the plaza and the main palace as the center, the area within 100 miles was its hunting ground. The 200 injured god lords had no power to fight back. They were all killed instantly by the black beast's sharp claws. In just 20 breaths, more than 40 god lords had turned to dust. The surviving god lords were terrified and desperate as they desperately tried to escape. Fortunately, Yen Tiangang Yi Wuji and the others arrived above the plaza in time. More than 50 upper god lords attacked at the same time to stop the crazily killing black beast. The two sides fought in the sky, chasing, intercepting and breaking out of the encirclement. Seeing Yen Tiangang Yi Wuji and the others holding back the black ferocious beast, the 100 or so god sovereigns who had survived finally showed expressions of relief. They finally understood that the Green Jade Palace wasn't easy to explore. If they didn't get rid of the black beast, they wouldn't be able to get any treasures. Therefore, many god lords gathered their courage and joined Yen Tiangang and the others to stop the beast. Most of the god lords felt that their injuries were too serious and it was better not to join in the fun. They stayed away from the plaza and the main palace and watched the battle from the sidelines. When Yen Tiangang and the others were fighting the black beast, Ji Tianxing quietly left the dark space. Killing Yen Tiangang and the other god lords wasn't his goal. Killing the black beast wasn't his goal either. He came to the Green Jade Palace this time to find some king-level divine artifacts and materials. Therefore, he didn't stay in the dark space and didn't even care about the result of the battle. He quietly left. After returning to the ground, he remained invisible and started to observe the layout of the palace. Green Jade Divine King's residence had been destroyed and turned into a mess of ruins. With the ruins as the center, there were palaces and residences within 100 miles. Ji Tianxing roughly observed it once and made a judgment in his heart. There are so many palaces and residences that at least 100,000 people can live in them. But even at its peak, the Green Jade Palace couldn't have 100,000 people. So, those palaces and residences are just decorations. There's no need for me to waste time searching those places. Even God King Azure Jade's residence did not have many valuable treasures, much less the unimportant palaces around it. Ji Tianxing pondered for a moment before his gaze finally landed 100 miles away. Within 100 miles, there were houses and buildings, and 100 miles to the north, there was actually a dark green mountain. Even though it had been 10,000 years, the mountain peak was still lush and green. Towering ancient trees grew on the mountain, and a thick layer of fallen leaves and rotten branches piled up on the ground. Obviously, the trees would also wither and flourish over the course of 10,000 years in order to survive. Ji Tianxing probed with his divine sense and saw a flat grassland behind the 1,000-foot-tall mountain. The grassland extended for 100 miles, and there was a lake as clear as a mirror. On the other side of the lake, there were 2 mountain ranges and several mountain peaks. Such an elegant environment made people feel relaxed and happy. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and thought to himself, there are mountains and grasslands in the divine palace? This should be a grotto heaven created by God King Green Jade. Since I can't find treasures in the palace, why don't I go to the other side of the mountain to take a look? Making up his mind, Ji Tianxing quietly flew across the sky and entered the mountain range. Within a radius of 10,000 miles, there were a total of 9 majestic mountain ranges and 100 lofty mountain peaks. The various mountain peaks were all lush and green. Although there were all kinds of trees and flowers, fruits and medicinal herbs, there were no birds or beasts. Instead, some ancient trees that had grown for over 10,000 years actually gave birth to intelligence and started cultivating. Naturally, these ancient trees became tree demons. And because their strength reached true god and celestial deity realm, they were all tree gods. Ji Tianxing flew over the mountain range and discovered a total of 6 tree gods. He originally wanted to find those tree gods to ask about the situation. But he thought about it again, those few tree gods' intelligence was not high. They might not know about the matters from 10,000 years ago, so there was also no need to ask. In the end, Ji Tianxing flew out 10,000 miles and arrived at the end of the mountain range. That was a giant mountain that was 10,000 feet tall. Above the mountainside was shrouded in clouds. That was the edge of this grotto heaven and also the deepest part. Ji Tianxing used his divine sense to investigate and unexpectedly discovered that there was actually a stone house at the peak of the giant mountain. It was a simple stone house with a radius of 1,000 feet. It was built with millstone-sized rocks. There was no exquisite design, nor was there any luxurious divine stone embellishment. It was filled with a strong primitive style and also seemed somewhat boorish. Could that stone house be God King Green Jade's true residence? This thought flashed across Ji Tianxing's mind as he vaguely looked forward to it. He stepped into the sky and teleported to the peak of the giant mountain, landing in front of the stone house. The stone house was indeed in its primitive state. There were no decorations, not even a defensive divine array. Ji Tianxing did not need to break the array. He directly entered the stone house and began to investigate the situation. The stone house was divided into 3 rooms. On the left was a secret room. The ground and the rocks on the walls were engraved with array patterns and embedded with many godly stones, forming a mysterious godly array. Ji Tianxing used the divine eye mystic technique to look and revealed a look of surprise. It's actually a time divine array. That kid Chao Qingyu had just broken through to God King not long ago, but he grasped time divine ability? The divine array in the secret room had the effect of accelerating time. The flow of time in the array was 3 times faster than the outside world. It was convenient for him to cultivate in seclusion. After the shock, Ji Tianxing thought about it and felt that it was not very likely. At most, he cultivated some kind of time divine ability. It's impossible for him to grasp time laws. After all, I was a peak god king back then, but I also did not completely grasp time laws. After dispelling this thought, Ji Tianxing observed the second room. The room in the middle should be God King Green Jade's study. There was only a stone chair and a stone table inside. There were many layers carved into the walls. Over 100 jade slips were scattered on the stone table. They were clearly old and covered in dust. There were also many treasure boxes, golden paper, jade slips and so on stored in the layers on the walls. Ji Tianxing casually picked up a few jade slips and used his divine sense to read the information inside. It turned out that those jade slips recorded all kinds of divine abilities and mystic techniques, as well as all kinds of alchemy, medicine refinement and array formation methods. Ji Tianxing guessed that God King Green Jade usually stayed in this room to study all kinds of divine abilities and mystic techniques. He gathered all kinds of knowledge in the world, wanting to create his own king-class divine ability supreme skill. Putting down those jade slips, he stepped into the third room. There was a divine array set up in this room. It was clearly for alchemy and artifact refinement. The center of the array formation was empty. The pill furnace that should have been there was clearly taken away by God King Green Jade. There were many layers on the walls. Inside were treasure boxes and all kinds of alchemy and artifact refinement materials. When Ji Tianxing successfully found a set of king-class artifact refinement materials among the treasure boxes, he revealed a gratified smile. Galaxy Golden Sand? This trip was not in vain. Chapter 32-29. Galaxy Golden Sand was a true God King level material. This item only existed in the extraterritorial starry sky, in the galaxy formed by millions of stars. Many stars would age and die, shattering into countless meteorites and debris, rapidly flowing in the galaxy. During this process, the meteorites and debris would burn, constantly removing the impurities, and their volume would become smaller and smaller. In the end, all the impurities would be exhausted, leaving only the purest sand and rock. This was the true galaxy golden sand. This item was not easy to obtain. It usually took hundreds or thousands of years to find. Most importantly, only God King level experts who entered the extraterritorial starry sky could find this item. Therefore, galaxy golden sand was very rare and precious. Even if some sects and families offered a sky-high price of 100 billion god stones, they could not buy this God King level material. After all, the value of this material could no longer be measured by god stones. Ji Tianxing held the ancient bronze treasure box in his hands and looked at the 3 jade bottles in the treasure box with a gratified smile on his face. The 3 crystal-clear jade bottles were filled with fine sand that shone with golden light, exuding extremely pure and rich star power. At first glance, the 3 jade bottles were only the size of a palm and could not contain much galaxy golden sand. But in reality, these 3 jade bottles were also divine artifacts. The space inside was very large. Ji Tianxing wanted to use the galaxy golden sand to refine the burial of Heaven Sword and improve the quality of the burial of Heaven Sword. He only needed the galaxy golden sand in 1 jade bottle. The remaining 2 jade bottles contained galaxy golden sand, which could be used to refine other God King level divine artifacts in the future. Swoosh! With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing closed the treasure box and kept it in his interspatial ring. He picked up one treasure box after another and opened it to check the materials in the treasure box. In the entire room there were more than 150 treasure boxes. In each treasure box, there were 1 or 2 elixir refinement and weapon refinement materials. Most of the materials were top-grade monarch grade. They were also priceless treasures. From these elixir refinement and weapon refinement materials, Ji Tianxing found another 2 sets of God King level materials. 1 set of Black Extreme Source Qi Quintessential Essence, and the other set of 30,000-year-old Divine Dragon Spine. These 2 sets of God King level materials could both be used to refine divine pills and divine artifacts. With these 3 God King level materials, Ji Tianxing's goal would be achieved. This trip would not have been in vain. Moreover, the other 150 treasure boxes were filled with top-grade monarch level materials. Of course, Ji Tianxing would take them all. He would never leave them for the experts of the various forces. After ransacking the alchemy room, Ji Tianxing returned to the study in the middle. There were hundreds of jade slips scattered on the stone table. He checked them one by one with his divine sense. He also patiently checked the golden papers and jade slips in the compartments of the walls. This process was a little slow and it also consumed a lot of mental and physical energy. It took Ji Tianxing nearly 2 hours to finish reading all the contents of the golden paper and jade slips. The situation was just as he had expected. Those jade slips recorded more than 8,000 kinds of magical powers and secret techniques. And all of them were top-notch magical powers of the monarch grade. Regardless of whether it was ultimate killing moves, inner strength mental cultivation methods or alchemy and formation techniques, God King Azure Jade did not reject any of them. He had been in seclusion for many years in the secret room, studying the 8,000 kinds of magical powers and secret techniques. He wanted to create a king-level magical power. In order to create a set of king-level magical powers, he worked day and night year after year. He poured all his effort into it. In the process of deducing and creating his own magical powers, he was so focused and immersed that he forgot to eat and sleep. He had entered a state of madness. Almost every few days he would have new ideas and discoveries. He would immediately record them on the golden paper. However, as time passed, he had to eliminate many of his ideas after analyzing and deducing. Although God King Azure Jade did his best, the result was regrettable. He had been studying in this secret room for more than 500 years, but he still failed. He had worked hard for more than 500 years and tried nearly 100,000 times. He had tens of thousands of ideas. However, in the end he still could not create the king-level magical power that he wanted. This was because he needed a king-level magical power cultivation method that had the effect of transforming the divine body, bloodline, and soul. At the same time, this king-level magical power cultivation method had the effect of healing and could help the cultivator break through to the godly king realm. It's no wonder God King Azure Jade failed with such a complicated request. Ji Tianxing could not help but murmur after he finished reading the golden paper and jade bamboo slips in the study room. However, Chao Qingyu had already broken through to the godly king realm. Why did he have to do this? He could have comprehended and created some king-level magical powers to increase his strength. Why did he have to create such a complicated magical power cultivation method and help the cultivator break through to the godly king realm? Could it be that his original intention of creating a king-level magical power was not for himself, but for someone else? This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. Suddenly he had a flash of inspiration and was 80% confident. Creating a king-level magical power for someone else? Who is worthy of him spending hundreds of years on? Is it his family, his best friend, or his cultivation partner? Ji Tianxing analyzed silently. In fact, he already had an answer in his heart. However, in order to confirm his answer, he carefully recalled the contents of the golden paper and jade bamboo slips. He vaguely remembered that in the vast sea of information, there seemed to be a few mentions of his original intention of creating a magical power cultivation method. Soon Ji Tianxing found a few key pieces of information in the vast sea of memories. I can't let her down. I have to succeed no matter what. So what if I become a godly king? I'm still so useless. I can't do anything to help her when she's being tortured. She's the love of my life. She made such a huge sacrifice for me. No matter what she becomes, I'll accept it. Even if I can't succeed, there are so many godly kings in the world. There must be a way. One day, I'll find a way to free her from her pain and return her to her original state. Wait for me. No matter if it's 1,000 years or 10,000 years, I'll be back. These few pieces of information were some emotions and lamentations that godly King Azure Jade had casually recorded in his cultivation notes. Ji Tianxing could imagine how anxious and tormented godly King Azure Jade must have been when he was in seclusion to comprehend the magical power. When a person had no one to confide in, they would subconsciously leave behind some words in the golden paper and jade bamboo slips. After sorting out these few pieces of information, Ji Tianxing's answer was basically confirmed. Chao Qingyu thought of a way to create a king-level magical power. It wasn't for himself but to save that woman called Lan. Lan was the love of his life, but she made such a huge sacrifice for him. She even changed her appearance and endured pain and torment. Although he failed and couldn't find a way to save Lan. However, he believed that the world was vast and there were many godly kings. There must be someone who could solve the problem. Therefore, he left Green Jade Palace alone to wander the world and find a way to save her. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as he sorted out the cause and effect of the matter. At the same time, he also guessed the identity of Lan. Chapter 32:30. Divine King Azure Jade's true love, that woman called Lan. It was actually that ugly and hideous black ferocious beast suppressed in the dark space. How could these two be equated? Unimaginable. Unbelievable. But Ji Tianxing figured out the ins and outs and deduced this answer. He was very certain. He could roughly guess that the story was as follows. Back then, Chao Qingyu and Lan loved each other and were a couple that made people envious. The two were both the Great Yan Empire's top divine lord experts and both had high hopes of breaking through to the godly king realm. By chance, the two obtained some kind of fortuitous encounter. That was a tremendous opportunity. If they could grasp it, it could help the two of them break through to the godly king realm. Of course, Chao Qingyu's talent was higher and his chances of breaking through to the godly king realm were greater. However, that fortuitous encounter coexisted with danger, appearing strange and unpredictable. The two of them could not be sure if the result would be a successful breakthrough or exploding and dying. After hesitating for a long time, Lan made a decision. She would try that opportunity first and let Chao Qingyu protect her. If she succeeded, there was naturally no need to say anything. If she failed, at least Chao Qingyu would be able to discover the problem and improve and avoid it. The result was very clear. Lan's attempt failed. Not only was she severely injured, her divine body also underwent a mutation, gradually evolving into a pitch-black and hideous ferocious beast covered in fur. In fact, even her divine soul and thinking were greatly affected. She would often go crazy uncontrollably, attacking and killing wantonly. Chao Qingyu was very sad, feeling that Lan had made such a great sacrifice for him. He felt very sorry for Lan. No matter what, he had to save Lan. Therefore, he used that advancement opportunity and worked hard to break through to the godly king realm. With Lan testing the method herself, he had experience and successfully avoided the danger, finally successfully breaking through to the godly king realm. After breaking through, he did not have much excitement or joy. Seeing Lanner's condition become more and more serious, going crazy like a ferocious beast all day, his heart burned with worry. He could only set up a few divine formations and create a dark space to suppress Lanner inside. Only then could she settle down and not wreak havoc and kill wantonly in the divine palace. After settling Lanner down, God King Green Jade came to this stone house and focused on researching a way to save Lanner. He took out his life savings and tried to concoct all kinds of divine pills and medicines for Lanner to consume. After Lanner consumed those divine pills, not only did they not cure her illness, but they also made her even more ferocious. Her strength also skyrocketed. Seeing that this method didn't work, if he continued to feed Lanner the divine pill, Lanner would definitely go crazy and lose her last shred of rationality. Thus he thought of another method. He wanted to gather all kinds of divine abilities and secret arts to comprehend and create a king-grade divine art. This king-grade secret art could not only cure Lanner's illness, but it could also restore her bloodline and soul. It could also help her break through to the God King realm. If he could succeed, it would be perfect. At that time, Lanner would return to normal and break through to the God King realm. The two of them would be able to travel the world. However, the difference between ideals and reality was too great. Even after hundreds of years of painstaking research, Green Jade Godly Monarch still couldn't create a king-level art. The setback and blow of failure made Green Jade Godly Monarch feel incomparably guilty and self-reproach. Seeing Lanner suffer torment and pain, his heart was also incomparably tormented. Therefore he weighed the pros and cons for a long time and finally made a decision. Leave Green Jade Palace, walk out of the Great Yen Empire and search the entire North region, even the entire boundless heaven continent. Although he couldn't save Lanner, he believed that the world was vast and there were many experts. Someone would definitely be able to save Lanner. Even if it took 1,000 or 10,000 years, he would have no regrets. Just like that, Green Jade Godly Monarch bade farewell to Lanner and left the Great Yen Empire. Now 10,000 years had passed. Green Jade Palace still existed and Lanner was still suffering in the dark space. However, Green Jade Godly Monarch never returned. He had stood her up. Above was the whole story that Ji Tianxing deduced. Although it was just an outline and not specific enough. Compared to the real situation, there were still some omissions and shortcomings. However, this was already close to the truth. That Lanner definitely can't imagine what kind of pain and suffering Chao Qingyu experienced in the 10,000 years that he wandered outside. Furthermore, there was a catastrophe 1,000 years ago. Perhaps Chao Qingyu died in that turmoil? It seems like she's destined to not be able to wait for her sweetheart to return. Ji Tianxing muttered a few words to himself. His tone was somewhat regretful. He waved his hand and shot out a few beams of golden light that swept up the jade slips on the stone table, as well as the golden paper and jade slips in the compartment. In a short while he put all the golden paper and jade slips into his interspatial ring. Even though these things didn't have much use or meaning to him. However, he couldn't stay here. If the various factions of the Great Yen Empire obtained them, it wouldn't be a good thing. Ji Tianxing circled the stone house again. After confirming that there was nothing valuable, he turned and left. On the way back he remained invisible and restrained his aura. He extended his divine perception and enveloped a radius of 5,000 miles, silently probing the entire Green Jade Palace. That's right. The Green Jade Palace was in an alternate space that had a radius of 5,000 miles. Other than the palaces and residences within 200 miles, the other areas were mountains, grasslands, lakes, and forests. This place was rich in divine power and the environment was quiet. It was considered a good paradise. Of course, the most precious treasures in the Green Jade Palace were all in that stone house. Ji Tianxing had plundered all of them. Now there was nothing worth exploring in the Green Jade Palace. In a short while, Ji Tianxing flew back to the vicinity of the Divine Palace and stopped above a palace. When he had left, the palaces and residences within 200 miles were still intact. Only the residence of the Green Jade Divine King had been reduced to rubble. Now everything within 200 miles had been reduced to rubble. It was a complete mess. The previously resplendent palaces were now in ruins. The sky was obscured by endless smoke and dust. The ground was also filled with cracks and deep pits. Countless fragments of bricks and stones were scattered everywhere. Dazzling divine lights were still colliding violently in the sky. The deafening sounds were still reverberating between heaven and earth. Without a doubt, Yan Tiangang and the divine sovereigns of the major forces were still doing their best to besiege the black ferocious beast. Of course, it was more appropriate to call it Lan'er. The two sides had been fighting fiercely for 2 hours. The aftershocks of the battle covered a radius of thousands of miles. Not only were the palaces and residences destroyed, but even the mountains and forests thousands of miles away had been reduced to rubble. The divine lords of the various factions had suffered heavy casualties. They had paid a terrible price. When they entered the palace, there were more than 300 divine lords. Most of them were severely injured. Now there were only about 40 high-level divine lords left. They were still fighting a bloody battle. Chapter 32-31. 70 to 80% of the 200 over severely injured Sir Gods had been killed by Lan. Only a few Sir Gods had escaped from Green Jade Palace when they saw that the situation was not good. As for the 120 over Sir Gods from the top 10 sects and families, they were not injured and their powers were still intact. In the previous 2 hours of battle, they were the main force against Lan. It was because of their tenacious support that the battle could last until now. Moreover, after paying a heavy price, they finally defeated Lan. At this moment, Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the rest led 40 over Sir Gods to form an encirclement, trapping Lan'er in the middle. Although everyone was severely injured and their bodies were covered in blood, they looked miserable. But Lan'er's injuries were even more miserable. Not only was its body covered in wounds that were so deep that the bones could be seen, even 2 of the wings on its back had been cut off. Purplish-black blood gushed out from its wounds, causing it to be bathed in blood and looking extremely miserable. Even though its power was comparable to a first-degree divine king. After being surrounded by so many Sir Gods for 2 hours, it became extremely weak. More than half of its power had been lost and it was panting heavily. Soul was also in a mess. When it used its divine abilities and ultimate skills, its power was not as strong as before. Even the speed at which it dodged was much slower than before. On the other hand, although Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the rest were severely injured, they had preserved their powers. Moreover, they had the advantage in numbers and had formed a battle formation to fight against the enemy. Even if they could hold on for another 2 hours, it would not be a problem. But Lan'er's situation was extremely dangerous and it was impossible for it to hold on for another 2 hours. It was surrounded by everyone and had tried to break through dozens of times. It had used all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills, but it was still unable to break through the encirclement. As its power became weaker and weaker, its soul was also becoming more and more unstable. Once its mind was muddled and it fell into a coma or a crazy state, its outcome was imaginable. It would definitely be torn into pieces by Yan Tiangang and the rest. At the same time, Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the rest saw Lan'er's state and they were all excited and full of anticipation. In order to boost morale, they all shouted, "Everyone continue to shrink the encirclement. That ferocious beast is already at the end of its rope. Although we have paid a heavy price, victory will still belong to us. That ferocious beast's injuries are too severe. It's already on the verge of fainting. As long as we approach it steadily, it will be the first to fall." The many injured divine lords heard the shouts of their leaders and their morale was greatly boosted. They were in high spirits. They arranged themselves in a battle formation and focused all of their attention as they closed in on Lan'er. The encirclement continued to shrink, and the surging killing intent also condensed into blood-red flames that filled the sky. The pressure on Lan'er grew stronger and stronger, and her body trembled uncontrollably. It let out a deep roar and even cursed with a hoarse voice, "You despicable bandits! All of them deserve to die." It was half the owner of the Green Jade Palace while the godly lords were invaders. However, Yan Tiangang Yi Wuji and the others were unwilling to bear the reputation of being bandits, so they all opened their mouths to refute. "We're bandits? No. We're helping Tianxing to get rid of the evil for the people. You're a ferocious and bloodthirsty beast. If you hadn't committed heinous crimes, why would you be suppressed in the darkness by the Green Jade Divine King? You've committed many sins. You should be satisfied that you've lived to this day." Not only were the experts not ashamed, they even reprimanded Lan'er with righteous words, as though they were upholding justice. Lan'er was so angry that she trembled. Flames of anger surged all over her body, and her eyes turned scarlet. Bastards! You unreasonable, heartless bastards, all of you will die a horrible death. Lan'er roared hysterically. With extreme anger and despair she charged towards the divine lords. She had waited bitterly for tens of thousands of years, but the green jade divine king had not appeared. She was extremely depressed, disappointed and desperate and even a little resentful. Now that she was in danger, she knew that she would not be able to escape and would definitely be killed on the spot. Therefore she carried the mentality that she would die together with them and that death was freedom and launched her final counterattack. In this battle she released the most dazzling divine light and unleashed all her trump cards without holding back. All sorts of divine light shadows covered the sky. Many divine lords had solemn expressions as they unleashed their ultimate skills with all their might to block Lan'er's attacks. Boom, 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 boom. Earth-shattering sounds erupted and reverberated between heaven and earth. Lan'er's all-out attack was easily neutralized by Yen Tiangang and the others. On the other hand, the divine lords joined forces and unleashed their ultimate skills continuously, causing Lan'er to retreat and her injuries to worsen. Both sides fought back and forth and the battle was unusually intense. However, Lan'er was obviously at a disadvantage. She was suppressed by the divine lords and would not be able to hold on for long before she was defeated. At this moment, Ji Tianxing remained invisible and watched the battle from the dark. In the beginning he did not want to interfere in this matter. Be it Yen Tiangang or Lan'er's life or death, it had nothing to do with him. He only wanted to find an opportunity to assassinate Grand Prince Lien, who was in the crowd. After all, Grand Prince Lien was among the 40 divine lords. His hair was disheveled and he was covered in blood. Other than Yi Wuji and the Grand Elder, only 3 elders of the He-Tian sect were still alive. The 5 divine lords' attention was focused on Lan'er and they had no time to protect Grand Prince Lien. However, Ji Tianxing saw Lan'er's situation and understood her story with Divine King Azure Jade. He could not help but feel sympathy for her. I opened the stone door and woke it up. I mistook it for a ferocious fiend beast and led Yen Tiangang and the others over. If it wasn't for me, it would not have fought with Yen Tiangang and the others and ended up in such a miserable state. Fine, I'll help at once for Divine King Azure Jade's sake. Ji Tianxing knew that Lan'er was not a bad person. He was even a kind girl. Otherwise she would not have sacrificed so much for Divine King Azure Jade. He and the 50 forces were the ones who were in the wrong when it came to exploring the Divine Palace. Azure Jade Palace was Lan'er's territory and they were all intruders. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were thieves. Moreover, he had taken Divine King Azure Jade's treasure. He would feel bad if he did not help Lan'er when she was in a desperate situation. So, while many Sir Gods were attacking Lan'er with all their might, Ji Tianxing approached her quietly. He locked onto Grand Prince Lien's aura and took out the Burial of Heaven sword and used his ultimate move. Burial of Heaven. Once the divine sword was out, a cold light shone. 100 feet long black light of death enveloped Grand Prince Lien with a storm of sword qi. At that moment, Grand Prince Lien was attacking Lan'er and was not prepared for an assassination attempt at all. When he sensed the danger of death, it was too late for him to dodge. Chapter 32-32. The fearsome sword radiance, with the power to suppress everything, fell from the sky and blasted towards Prince Lien. Under the cover of the sword light, even the space around the prince froze as if it were an ice cube. His body was also engulfed by the sword radiance. His black dragon robe was shredded by the sword radiance, and his long hair was cut into pieces. At this moment of life and death, his expression was extremely serious. He turned his head to look at the sword radiance descending from the sky and Ji Tianxing in the sky. His expression changed drastically, and his eyes were filled with shock and astonishment. "It's you. How can it be you?" Even the Grand Prince didn't expect Ji Tianxing to come here. Moreover, he had been hiding in the Green Jade Palace without being discovered. At this critical moment when everyone was fighting the Black Beast, he suddenly attacked. This was too despicable. This was too fatal. Prince Lien was shocked and terrified at the same time. He even felt the aura of death descending upon him. Such a sudden attack at such a close distance gave him no chance to dodge. The only thing he could do was to use all his power to form a dark golden shield to protect himself. Kaboom! The dazzling giant sword slammed into the dark gold shield, causing an earth-shattering boom to ring out. The dark golden shield that Prince Lien had formed with all his power only lasted for a moment before it was shattered into pieces. Countless shards spread out in all directions with a violent force. The two elders of the Hutian sect who were not far from Prince Lien were instantly affected. The divine light fragments that covered the sky were like sharp blades, leaving countless wounds on the bodies of the two elders. Blood spurted out from their wounds and filled the sky. At the same time, Prince Lien was also hit by the sword radiance. Half of his body was badly mutilated. His entire right arm was smashed into pieces, and the huge impact sent him flying. Moreover, he could not help but fly towards Lon. He could not help but scream in midair. Lon, who was dodging left and right, immediately seized the opportunity to attack Prince Lien with her claws. Bloody light filled the sky. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The light blade pierced through the air. Blood splattered in the sky and pieces of flesh flew everywhere. Prince Lien's body was already soaked in blood. Now that the light blade had pierced through his body, he looked like a sieve. The blood-curdling screams that were about to stop erupted once again, and the pitch of the screams had reached an even more shocking level. Seeing this, Yi Wuji and the Supreme Elder of the Hetian sect cried out in surprise. Their expressions changed drastically. Eternal Link. Damned evil creature, you're courting death. The great Supreme Elder glared at Ji Tianxing, locked onto his divine soul aura, and made a prompt decision to attack with his palm. Ji Tianxing wanted to take advantage of the situation to kill Grand Prince Lien, but he was stopped by Grand Elder. The sword light that filled the sky was intercepted by the Grand Elder's palm shadows. The two of them collided in the sky, creating a deafening explosion and sending millions of fragments flying everywhere. Ji Tianxing was unscathed, but the Grand Elder was knocked back 100 feet. His complexion alternated between green and red, and his chest heaved up and down rapidly. Even though Grand Elder had long reached peak Divine Lord realm. In terms of combat power, he was second only to Yen Tiangang and ranked in the top 3 in the Great Yen Empire. However, he was still at a disadvantage after clashing with Ji Tianxing, and his internal organs were also injured. Such an outcome shocked him greatly. You're Tianxing? That arrogant and bloodthirsty non-humankind kid? The Great Elder stared at Ji Tianxing and asked with a sonorous voice. He was also shocked. He hadn't thought that Ji Tianxing would be so bold as to sneak into the Green Jade Palace to assassinate Grand Prince Lien. At the same time, Grand Elder Grand Prince Lien Yi Wuji Yen Tiangang, and the others realized who Ji Tianxing was. So it's you. Audacious bastard, you actually stole the fruits of our victory. It's you. You bastard. You sneaked into the palace and angered this beast. Everyone understood that their previous guess was right. Ji Tianxing had indeed entered the palace before them. Not only did he take all the treasures in the palace, but he also released the suppressed beast which caused many divine lords to be killed. He was the culprit behind all of this. Instantly, the overlords of the large sects and families focused their attention on Ji Tianxing. Everyone hated him to the core, so they immediately let out a murderous aura and wanted to surround him. Compared to the beast that had killed many divine lords, they hated Ji Tianxing even more. However, everyone's attention was diverted and Loner's pressure was greatly reduced. She immediately attacked without hesitation. Swish swish swish. She turned into a crimson shadow and shot across the sky, releasing thousands of sharp crimson light blades that attacked many divine lords. Bang bang bang. There were continuous sounds and blood splashed in the crowd. Dozens of divine lords were hit and their injuries worsened. So Yen Tiangang and the other divine lords didn't dare to be distracted and they could only focus on Loner. Yen Tiangang shouted, Yi Wuji, you guys deal with that kid. Leave this beast to us. Facing the situation of being attacked from both inside and outside, Yen Tiangang was calm and decisive. He immediately adjusted his strategy. Yi Wuji understood his intention and immediately nodded. Then Yen Tiangang and more than 30 divine lords surrounded Loner. Yi Wuji, the great Grand Elder, the 3 elders of the Hetian sect, and the 9 Sir Gods of the 2 aristocratic families joined forces to attack Ji Tianxing. As for Grand Prince Lien, he took advantage of the fact that Ji Tianxing and Loner were besieged and had no time to chase after him. He hurriedly retreated from the battlefield and hid far away to heal his injuries. He was smart and didn't run away from the Green Jade Palace. Because there were almost 20,000 entities stationed outside the Green Jade Palace and they were all disorderly. Once Ji Tianxing got out of the encirclement and chased him out of the Green Jade Palace, no one would be able to help him. Staying in the Green Jade Palace was the wisest choice. He was standing in the sky 300 miles away from the battlefield. He could observe the situation on the battlefield and wouldn't be hurt by the aftermath of the battle. Once Ji Tianxing tried to assassinate him, he could detect it in advance and avoid it in time. Moreover, Yi Wuji, Grand Elder, and the others could also save him. Prince Lian thought to himself and felt that he was quite safe. He couldn't help but feel relieved. Yan Tiangang and more than 30 divine lords also surrounded Lan so that she couldn't escape. Yi Wuji and the 13 Sir Gods also joined forces to trap Ji Tianxing. On the surface, the situation seemed to have stabilized. Ji Tianxing and Lan were both under control. They wouldn't be able to hold on for long before they were killed by the crowd. However, something that no one expected happened. Ji Tianxing looked around and glanced at Yi Wuji, the Grand Elder, and more than a dozen divine lords. He sneered. Ha! Yan Tiangang and more than 30 divine lords surrounded Lan and Yi Wuji only brought a dozen divine lords to attack me. You are looking down on me. Do you think Lan is a bigger threat than me? Chapter 32-33. Ji Tianxing's muttering and sneering were heard clearly by Yi Wuji and the others. Even Lan, who was being attacked by Yan Tiangang and the others nearby, heard it. After all, they were all upper divine lords, top experts. Lan's body stiffened and her eyes widened as she looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. At that moment she was absent-minded. His muddle-headed mind seemed to have been struck by a bolt of lightning, and he instantly calmed down. She was stunned as she stared at Ji Tianxing, great waves surging in her heart. 2 lines of bloody tears instantly burst out from his eyes and slid down his cheeks. How do you know I? She muttered to herself, her heart filled with shock and bitterness. After 10,000 years she finally saw the light of day again and heard that familiar name. Lan, her name. Only that person had the right to call her that. At this moment, an absurd thought appeared in the depths of Lan's heart. Could it be him? Did he come back? He didn't abandon me, didn't forget our promise? But why did he change his appearance? Did I remember wrongly? Impossible. Even if 10,000 years have passed, I definitely won't forget his appearance. He must have changed. Something must have happened to him. Lan's mind raced and she actually thought that Ji Tianxing was Divine King Azure Jade. Of course, this was only her thought and guess. He wasn't sure. But at this moment, a sudden sky full of light blades and divine arts interrupted her thoughts. Bang! Bang bang! Swoosh swoosh swoosh! Lan was instantly drowned by the sky full of light blades. Her body shook violently as blood splattered all over her body. She was sent flying in a sorry state. She was still in midair, but she had already spat out a mouthful of blood and let out a painful groan. Clearly, Yan Tiangang and the others had seized the opportunity and successfully ambushed her while she was absent-minded. She was severely injured by this attack. Her injuries were even worse. Blood flowed out of her body and her strength was quickly fading. Yan Tiangang and the others took the opportunity to surround her and launch another round of fierce attacks on her. Lan was suppressed and her injuries kept worsening. She could only retreat and dodge, unable to fight back at all. On the other hand, the battle between Ji Tianxing and Yi Wuji and the others was beyond everyone's expectations. Facing the siege of a dozen divine lords, he smiled disdainfully and pointed his sword at the sky. Sky-destroying sword array. Instantly, 20,000 light spots appeared in the sky like a meteor shower. Whoosh 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 whoosh. 20,000 divine giant swords, carrying with them the power to destroy everything, instantly descended upon the scene. With Ji Tianxing as the center, the area within a radius of 100 miles was enveloped. Whoosh whoosh. Sword light crisscrossed, instantly forming a sword formation, sealing this area. Yi Wuji, Grand Elder, and more than a dozen Sir Gods were all suppressed by the sword formation. Everyone instantly felt the pressure increase explosively. Not only did it become difficult for them to move, but the circulation of their divine power was also abnormally blocked, and their combat prowess was greatly reduced. That was not all. Tens of thousands of giant divine swords poured down like rain. 10,000 swords shuttled back and forth, forming a storm of swords that enveloped many divine lords. Whoosh, whoosh. Those divine lords were in trouble. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Several divine lords were shredded into pieces by the sword's storm, and even their godheads were shattered. Then 2 elders of the Xian sect were also shrouded by hundreds of sword lights and shredded into pieces. Only Yi Wuji, Grand Elder, and a few divine lords were still struggling in the sword array. But as time went by, their divine power was quickly consumed and their combat power was weakening. Their injuries kept worsening. Ji Tianxing stood in the sword array and activated the power of the sword array to kill everyone. Yi Wuji, Grand Elder, and the others struggled with their injured bodies and desperately rushed toward Ji Tianxing. Let's kill him together. As long as we kill him, the sword array will collapse. Everyone was well aware that it was almost impossible to break this sword formation in a short period of time. Only killing Ji Tianxing was the simplest and most effective way. On the surface, they were only 20 miles away from Ji Tianxing. Normally, he would be able to teleport in front of Ji Tianxing with a single thought. But now they couldn't teleport in the sword array and could only fly. It was only 20 miles, but it was more difficult than reaching the sky. When they finally reached Ji Tianxing, a few more divine lords were shredded into pieces by the swords. Yi Wuji, Grand Elder, and the masters of the 2 families who were lucky enough to survive were also badly injured and very weak. Damn bastard, he is so strong. How strong is he? How can he kill so many divine lords? Has he surpassed the divine lord realm and reached the divine king realm? No matter how strong he is, we are already here and we can kill him soon. While their hearts were filled with shock and fear, the 4 powerhouses also staked everything on this one attack. They exploded with their strongest power and launched a fatal attack on Ji Tianxing. However, when all kinds of divine powers shrouded Ji Tianxing, his body became transparent and blurry. The world-destroying divine ability passed through him without any delay. It didn't cause any damage to him. Seeing this, the 4 experts were dumbfounded. Dumbfounded? What kind of evil art is this? Yi Wuji was shocked. Grand Elder was also shocked and exclaimed, "How is this possible?" The next moment, Ji Tianxing activated the sword array with all his strength and formed 4 storms with 8,000 giant swords. They fell from the sky and shrouded the 4 experts. Swish, swish, swish. Sword radiance flashed and sword chi surged. The destructive storm of swords shredded the 4 experts crazily. In the bright sword radiance, there was blood and debris splashing out, mixed with the groans and screams of the people. At this moment, Ji Tianxing didn't care about the 4 experts anymore. He flew out of the sword array without looking back and attacked Prince Lian in an invisible state. Because the 4 storm of swords had gathered all the power of the sky punishment sword array. Yi Wuji and the Grand Elder would definitely die. There was no way they could survive. In the distance, Prince Lian only saw him using the sword array to fight with Yi Wuji and the others. Prince Lian didn't expect the battle to end so quickly. Swish. Second later, Ji Tianxing teleported 300 miles and appeared behind Prince Lian. At this time, Grand Prince Lian had just swallowed a few divine pills and was refining them while keeping an eye on the situation on the battlefield. Yan Tiangang and more than 30 divine lords had beaten Lan Er, and she was on the verge of death. Prince Lian was a bit comforted. The only thing he was worried about was whether Yi Wuji and the others in the sword array could kill Ji Tianxing. Just as he was filled with anxiety and worry, a dazzling divine light suddenly erupted behind him. An extremely cold and deadly energy immediately enveloped his body, making him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Swish. He subconsciously turned around and saw the sword light that could destroy heaven and earth growing larger and larger in front of him. There was also a familiar face looking at him with a half-smile. At this moment, Prince Lian was terrified. Chapter 32-34. Boom. There was a deafening sound. A ball of 5-colored divine light bloomed in the night sky like a lotus. Prince Lian, who was riddled with wounds, also exploded into pieces amidst the divine light that filled the sky. Countless flowers of blood splattered everywhere. Ji Tianxing's sword destroyed his divine body on the spot. Even his divine spark suffered serious injuries. Cracks appeared on it and blood splashed out. His consciousness became blurry and dizzy, and his godhead was carried away by the waves, flying into the distance. Yi Wuji, the Great Elder, and the others could not see this scene. They were in the sky punishment sword array, suppressed by the blade storm and couldn't even protect themselves. Yan Tiangang and the other divine sovereigns noticed that Grand Prince Lian had been ambushed and saw Ji Tianxing's figure. Everyone turned pale with fright and cried out in alarm. But no one could save Prince Lian. There was no time to save him. Then Tianxing caught up and slashed at Prince Lian's divine spark with all his might. Crack! Grand Prince Lian's godhead crumbled on the spot, leaving behind a dozen pieces. Prince Lian was dead. With a wave of his hand, Tianxing collected the godhead fragments into his pouch. At the same time, the 4 divine emperors in the Sky Punishment Sword Array were also at the last moment. The first to be shredded into pieces by the sword light was the patriarchs of the 2 aristocratic families. Then the Grand Elder's divine artifact collapsed and his divine body was crushed. His divine spark was also shattered. Wuji held on until the end. He used all kinds of divine artifacts and divine powers, but he still couldn't stop the thousands of swords. He was soon crushed into pieces. A dozen divine spark pieces also fell in the sword array along with the rain of blood. Everyone in the sword array was dead. The Sky Punishment Sword Array gradually stopped and the 20,000 giant swords floated in the air. Yan Tiangang and the other divine emperors could see what was going on inside the sword array. Everyone knew that Yi Wuji and a dozen divine emperors had gone to kill Tianxing. Tianxing was outside the sword array and had just killed Prince Lian. However, the sword formation that had stopped operating was empty. There was not a single person in sight. Yi Wuji and the dozen divine emperors had all disappeared. Yan Tiangang and the other 30 Sir Gods were shocked and terrified. Many people could not help but cry out in surprise. Oh my God! Sect Master Yi and the rest, were they all killed by that bastard? The sword formation has stopped operating. It's empty inside. Sect Leader Yi and the others must have met with misfortune. How is this possible? Sect Master Yi and more than a dozen experts joined forces, but they still couldn't kill him? And he was killed instead? Who the hell is that guy? How can his methods be so terrifying? Compared to that ferocious beast, this kid is even more terrifying. Everyone be careful. After he killed Sect Leader Yi and the others, he'll come after us. Many Sir Gods realized that something was amiss. They quickly retracted their defenses and were on guard against Tianxing. Everyone slowed down their attacks and diverted their attention to Tianxing. Instantly the pressure on Lan was greatly reduced. Tianxing was in no hurry to attack. He first flew into the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and put the godhead fragments of the dozen Sir Gods into his spatial ring. Then he flew toward Yan Tiangang and the others at a moderate pace. When he was 100,000 feet away from them, he stopped in the air and stared at the Sir Gods with an indifferent expression. The Sir Gods acted as though they were facing a great enemy. They had to suppress Lan and guard against Tianxing. Yan Tiangang also stopped attacking Lan. He looked at Tianxing with a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, I know you're the god of slaughter Tianxing from before. Kid, you have a grudge against Prince Lian and are at odds with the Hetian sect. This is a grudge between the two of you. However, Great Yan's imperial family and the other major sects and clans have no grudge against you. So you'd better stop before going too far. Otherwise we can only fight to the death. No one had expected that Yan Tiangang would actually say such words. Although his words sounded like a threat to Tianxing, they were, in truth, fearful of him. If it wasn't necessary, the people from the major sects and clans were like Yan Tiangang. They didn't want to provoke Tianxing. Everyone's attitudes and opinions were the same. The leaders echoed Yan Tiangang's words. Tianxing revealed a smile when he saw everyone's reaction and he muttered to himself. Fortunately, this group of old fellows aren't stubborn and know how to judge the situation. This makes it easy to deal with. Hence, he pointed at Lan who was surrounded and said to Yan Tiangang and the others, That's not a beast. She's also a member of Great Yan's divine race. She only became like this because of an accident. You have no grudge against her. You only entered the Green Jade Palace to seek wealth and fortuitous encounters. Even if you pay a painful price and kill her today, you won't gain anything. How about this? If you let her go, I won't make things difficult for you. We won't have anything to do with each other. What do you think? This. Yan Tiangang immediately hesitated and didn't say anything. The divine lords of the major sects and clans were also tempted by Tianxing's words. They all sent voice transmissions to Yan Tiangang to persuade him. Forefather, that kid is right. We don't have to fight this beast to the death. That kid has no grudge against us. As long as we agree to his conditions, we won't have to fight with him. This old man can see that the brat wants to save this ferocious beast. He doesn't want to fight with us unless it's necessary. Old ancestor, let's release this beast and mind our own business with that brat. Yan Tiangang frowned inwardly when he heard everyone's persuasion. He hurriedly used his consciousness to explain to everyone. How can I not understand what you're saying? But have you thought about it? That kid sneaked into the Green Jade Palace when we weren't paying attention. If there were any inheritances or treasures in the palace, he would have gotten them long ago. Now that the palace has been destroyed, there's nothing left. Even if we don't fight with him, we won't be able to find anything valuable in the palace. Furthermore, he cares so much about this beast. He must have some other motives. This beast has been sealed here for 10,000 years. It must have something to do with the Green Jade Divine King. How can we let it go? After Yan Tiangong's analysis, many divine lords came to a realization and felt that something was amiss. Everyone also began to hesitate if they should let Lan Er go. If they let Lan Er go, they naturally wouldn't fight with Ji Tianxing. However, it was very likely that they would return empty-handed after coming here. If they didn't let Lan Er go, they might discover the secret of the Green Jade Palace from Lan. However, they would have to fight with Ji Tianxing. At that time they would have to pay a terrible price. Just as everyone was hesitating and wavering, Ji Tianxing saw through everyone's thoughts and immediately sneered. Since you are unwilling and are still hesitating, I'll help you make the decision. As his voice fell, he brazenly waved the Burial of Heaven sword and sent out a sword beam that covered the sky towards the dozen divine lords. Chapter 32-35. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The sky was covered by the sword light and the space was in chaos. The dozen Sir Gods that were covered by the sword light were so frightened that their expressions changed drastically. Their eyes were filled with fear. They finally saw the God of Massacre's way of doing things. He was decisive and ruthless. Of course, it was useless to say that now. They had no choice but to retreat with all their might and cast defensive divine arts to block the sword light. Bam, 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 bam. The sword light hit a golden shield and made a loud noise. Countless divine light shards splashed. Only 6 Sir Gods were safe and sound. The other 8 Sir Gods were sent flying. Blood spurted out of their bodies and they screamed in pain. Although they had kept their lives and their divine bodies were not destroyed, their injuries were much worse. However, their injuries were even more severe and their battle prowess had plummeted. That was Ji Tianxing's warning to everyone. He didn't attack again after the first move. However, Yan Tiangang and the other Sir Gods felt humiliated. They were so angry that they were trembling. Bastard! You are too arrogant. You want to kill us because of a disagreement? Do you really think that no one in the Great Yan Empire can defeat you? Kid, you forced us to do this. Yan Tiangang and the other divine sovereigns attacked Ji Tianxing while yelling and cursing at him. Everyone gave it their all, each of them using their own unique divine arts, releasing divine arts that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, bombarding him from the sky. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and chuckled. Hee, they are indeed a group of high and mighty people who are used to abusing their power. You would rather sacrifice more lives than be looked down upon and humiliated. As he spoke, he cast the dragon elephant divine fist with his left hand and swung the Burial of Heaven with his right hand. Boom! The mountain-sized dragon elephant shadow smashed towards Yan Tiangang and the others with an unstoppable power that could destroy everything. The Burial of Heaven also swung the Sword of Heaven and used Galaxy Flow Break to slash at the Sir Gods. Bam, bam, bam. The divine spells used by the two sides collided, creating a deafening sound that reverberated between heaven and earth. Hundreds of divine ability lights and shadows were shattered. Divine light fragments burst out and filled the sky, scattering in all directions. Ji Tianxing was knocked back thousands of meters. His white robe and black hair fluttered in the wind and his face was slightly pale. After all, he was facing over 30 high divine lords. It was already very impressive that he hadn't been killed by the combined attacks of the other party. Of course, the outcome of the 30 over Sir Gods was even more miserable. More than half of the divine lords were swept up by the sword beams and sword chi. They were sent flying 1,000 feet away, their injuries even worse. Only Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the various sects and families were safe and sound. The battle formation that everyone had formed was destroyed. Ji Tianxing took advantage of the situation to pursue and attack. Lan Er also seized the opportunity to ambush and kill a few severely injured Sir Gods. Yan Tiangong's side had over 30 people. Compared to Ji Tianxing and Lan, they had an absolute advantage. They had more than 10 times the number of people. However, the situation on the battlefield was completely opposite. It was Ji Tianxing and Lan who attacked Yan Tiangang and the others in a pincer attack. In less than 20 breaths of time, more than 10 Sir Gods had died at the hands of Ji Tianxing and Lan. Even Yan Tiangang was heavily injured. He was in a very sorry state. At this point, Yan Tiangang and the other Sir Gods were in complete despair. If they continued to fight, they would all die here. Moreover, they wouldn't be able to kill Ji Tianxing and Lan. Therefore, they could only endure the humiliation and anger, throw away their dignity and face and flee in a sorry state. Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the 4 sects and families brought up the rear, tenaciously resisting Ji Tianxing and Lan's attacks. The other 20 Sir Gods fled without looking back. In the blink of an eye, they rushed out of the divine palace and flew into the sea of clouds. Seeing that the Sir Gods had fled the divine palace, Yan Tiangang and the 4 sect leaders turned and fled towards the divine palace. The 20,000 divine spirits who were guarding outside the sea of clouds surrounded the divine palace, anxiously and worriedly waiting. In the past few hours, they had been hearing earth-shaking explosions coming from the divine palace. They didn't need to look to know that those were the sounds of many experts fighting. However, the battle in the divine palace had lasted for so long and showed no signs of stopping. No matter how anxious and worried the elites of the various factions were, they had to obediently guard outside the divine palace. They didn't dare to barge in. Finally, under the worried, expectant and anxious gazes of the 20,000 divine spirits, several figures flew out of the divine palace. Whoosh, whoosh whoosh. They were several high Sir Gods from different factions. They were all covered in blood and looked like they were on the verge of death. They were like stray dogs fleeing in panic. They didn't have the dignity and nobility of the past. Seeing this scene, the 20,000 divine spirits were dumbfounded. Countless people were shocked and aghast. Everyone did not expect that those powerful high divine lords would also be defeated so miserably. Soon after, a dozen or so high-level divine lords covered in blood flew out of the divine palace like bolts of lightning. They flew across the sea of clouds as fast as lightning and fled into the distance. They even shouted loudly, "Run! Leave this place! What are you waiting for? Run! Run! Otherwise everyone will die." The shouts of the many Sir Gods reverberated in the sea of clouds. The 20,000 gods were already shocked, and when they heard the blood-sobbing cries, they were even more terrified and at a loss for what to do. The elites of many factions subconsciously turned and fled, distancing themselves from the Green Jade Divine Palace. Only the top 10 sects and clans hesitated for a moment before deciding to observe the situation. At this moment, another 5 figures flew out of the Divine Palace. Swoosh, swoosh swoosh. The divine spirits focused and saw that it was Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the 4 major sects and clans. These 5 high Sir Gods could be said to be the strongest experts in the empire. No one had expected that even they would be covered in wounds and fleeing in a sorry state. With this, the last bit of hope of the divine spirits was extinguished. Seeing Yan Tiangang and the others flee, everyone outside the divine palace turned and fled without a care for their own safety. After a few breaths, the area outside the divine palace was empty. Not a single person could be seen. At the same time, Lan rushed to the divine palace's entrance with blood-red flames of killing intent burning all over her body. Her eyes were bloodshot. She did not care that her divine body was on the verge of collapse and that she could faint at any moment. She still wanted to chase after those Sir Gods. However, Ji Tianxing released a giant golden palm and held her firmly, stopping her. "Don't chase a cornered enemy." Lan was imprisoned by the giant golden palm and could not move even if she struggled with all her might. Hearing Ji Tianxing's warning, she shouted with killing intent, "Let me go." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a ray of divine light, closing the divine palace's entrance. He grabbed Lan with the giant golden palm and walked into the divine palace. "In your current state, if you really chase after them, you will die in less than 100 breaths. Chapter 32-36. Lan's emotions had fluctuated greatly. She had suffered too much shock and was a little crazy and out of control. But now that the battle was over, the Green Jade Palace was quiet. She was also captured by Ji Tianxing and could not move at all. It was even more difficult for her to escape. After a while she gradually calmed down. The blood-red flames that were emitting from her body also gradually extinguished. "All right, you can let go of me now." She lowered her head and said in a low voice. Seeing that her emotions had indeed stabilized, Ji Tianxing removed the giant golden palm. Lan did not act rashly. Her body was bent as she stood on the ruins. She lowered her head and coughed and gasped for breath. Her injuries were very serious. Her body was covered with wounds that were so deep that her bones could be seen. If her injuries were more serious, her divine body would have collapsed. Moreover, her divine soul was already mutated and flawed. After suffering such serious injuries, she was even more on the verge of death. At this moment she only felt that her entire body was cold and her strength was extremely weak. Her eyes were dark and she could faint at any time. Of course, Ji Tianxing could see how serious her injuries were. Seeing that Lan was almost unable to stand steadily, he quickly took out 2 divine pills and handed them to Lan. "Take these 2 divine pills and stabilize your injuries first. Otherwise, your divine path foundation will be destroyed." Lan was stunned for a moment. She did not take the 2 divine pills. She slowly raised her head. Her eyes were stained with blood and tears. She looked at Ji Tianxing with a complicated expression. Even though her consciousness was getting dizzier and her eyes were getting blurry. She tried her best to open her eyes and tried her best to see Ji Tianxing's face clearly. Seeing her reaction, Ji Tianxing could not help but urge, "You are already so injured. Can you take the pills first and we can talk about other things? Don't worry, those 2 pills are definitely fine. If I wanted to harm you, I could kill you with a few moves. Why would I do anything to the pills?" Lan was still unmoved. She did not look at the 2 pills. She stared at Ji Tianxing with hazy eyes. She shook her head gently and said in a low and hoarse voice, "Who are you? Why do you know my name? Why did you save me?" Ji Tianxing was rather helpless, but he couldn't tell her the truth, so he could only ask, "If I tell you the answer, will you take the 2 divine pills?" Actually, those 2 divine pills were refined by Divine King Green Jade specifically to save Lan. Previously, Ji Tianxing had taken away all the treasures in the stone house, which naturally included those divine pills and miraculous medicines. Lan thought for a moment and nodded. Ji Tianxing felt slightly comforted and explained, "My name is Tianxing. I came here in pursuit of my enemy and accidentally saw the books and jade scrolls left behind by the Green Jade Deity King. Only then did I know. Ha ha ha. Is that so?" Lan's tone was somewhat sorrowful as she sneered a few times. The look in her eyes became even more complicated. There was mockery and contempt as well as disappointment and disappointment. Ji Tianxing felt a headache coming on. He thought to himself, "This guy must have misunderstood, right? I wonder what she's thinking?" Fortunately, Lan didn't say much. She waved her claws and grabbed the 2 golden divine pills before swallowing them. Zoosh. When those 2 divine pills entered her body, they immediately blossomed with a dazzling golden light, bursting forth with a vast and mighty divine power. Lan's body immediately trembled. Thousands of wisps of black fog and blood energy splattered out all over her body. Her body also started trembling violently. She gave a somewhat painful muffled groan. Her eyes gradually closed and she fell unconscious. But before she fainted, her eyes widened, glaring at Ji Tianxing with a sharp glint. She shouted coldly, "Don't think of lying to me, it's you." After saying that, she fell completely unconscious and collapsed on the ruins, not moving anymore. Ji Tianxing frowned helplessly and muttered to himself, "She wouldn't have received too much of a shock and already gone crazy, right?" Although he said so verbally, he was very conflicted in his heart and fell into hesitation. Originally, Lan and Divine King Green Jade's matter had nothing to do with him. He also did not care too much about Lan's life and death. He could just turn a blind eye and leave. After leaving the Green Jade Divine Palace, he went to find a place to enter seclusion and cultivate, hurriedly refining the many Divine Lord Divine Spark fragments. He would be able to break through to the 9th level Divine Lord realm very soon. But he had the fate of meeting Divine King Green Jade once before. Furthermore, he sowed good karma. After coming to the Green Jade Divine Palace, he also learned about Divine King Green Jade and Lan's story. Toward these 2 people with bitter fates, he more or less had some sympathy in his heart. Moreover, he mistakenly barged into the underground secret chamber and severed the chains suppressing Lan. This led to the great battle later on. Furthermore, he even took away Divine King Greenjade's treasures and materials. From an emotional point of view, he could not leave her in the lurch. Now there were two choices in front of him. 1. Leave the Green Jade Divine Palace from here on and ignore Loner's life and death. Anyway, she also consumed the divine pill refined by Divine King Greenjade. Furthermore, her injuries would not really be fatal. Even if he did not help her, she would not die either. It was just that her injuries were too severe. Her divine body might shatter and her divine Tao foundation might collapse too. 2. Follow the kindness in his heart and try to help Loner treat her injuries. Only then could he have a clear conscience. But doing so might cause Loner to misunderstand and might also cause some unnecessary trouble. After hesitating for a moment, Ji Tianxing finally made a decision. I still have to help. Leaving her in the lurch is not my character. As he spoke, he used his divine sense to call out to Yunyao and Jiku, who were in the distorted space. Unfortunately, Jiku was at a critical juncture of his closed-door cultivation and could not be disturbed. Only Yunyao could leave. She had just broken through not long ago and was circulating her energy to nourish her foundation. Hearing Ji Tianxing's call, she left the Jiutian Tenju Tower and appeared in front of Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, what's the matter? Yunyao, who was wearing a moon-white dress, was colder and more beautiful than usual. Ji Tianxing pointed at Loner, who was 10 steps away, and explained to Yunyao, I'm in the Green Jade Divine Palace now. That ferocious-looking beast is Divine King Green Jade's lover. He told Yunyao the ins and outs of the matter as well as Loner's true identity. After hearing this, Yunyao understood what he meant. Tianxing, you want to treat Loner's injuries, but you don't want her to misunderstand, so you asked me to help you to avoid suspicion, right? Ji Tianxing nodded. Yunyao nodded slightly and said in a gentle tone, Tianxing, you don't have to avoid suspicion. No matter what you do, we will believe you. Ji Tianxing smiled bitterly and said, of course you believe me, but this Loner can't. She's confused and has already misunderstood. As expected, Loner, who was originally unconscious and in a blurred state, shouted in a sad and intermittent voice as if she was sleep-talking, Green Jade, you're back? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Why did you hide and change your appearance to see me? Could it be that you're tired of, don't want to see, a monster like me? Hearing her words, Ji Tianxing and Yunyao looked at each other. Ji Tianxing spread his hands helplessly and said, I told you it's a big misunderstanding. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 30-37. Loner's obsession was too deep. Now that she was unconscious, her consciousness was muddled. Ji Tianxing and Yunyao couldn't explain anything to her at this time. The two of them could only take the unconscious Loner and fly into the depths of the Green Jade Palace. At the edge of the space thousands of miles away, the mountain and the stone house on top of the mountain were still intact. Ji Tianxing and Yunyao landed here and put Loner in the secret chamber. Then Ji Tianxing used his secret skill to treat Loner's injuries. Yunyao stood guard at the side. She took care of Loner and also helped Ji Tianxing to protect him. As time passed, the bloodstains and wounds on Loner's body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Ji Tianxing spent half a day to treat her external injuries. Then he began to treat her internal injuries. The internal injuries were more troublesome. It would take at least a few days. As for the injuries to the divine soul, they were the most troublesome. They could only be ranked last. Just like that, time passed day after day. Ji Tianxing kept using his secret skill. He didn't stop and didn't feel tired. The divine power in this Green Jade Palace was incomparably abundant. It was as if it was inexhaustible. After a full 5 days, Loner's internal injuries were stabilized. Although she was still unconscious, her injuries wouldn't worsen. However, her injuries would not continue to worsen. Her life and the foundation of the divine path were both preserved. Ji Tianxing spent another 8 days using his secret skill to treat her divine soul injuries. Once the injury to her soul stabilized, she would be fine as a whole. Ji Tianxing took out 2 divine pills for her to consume. Then she went into hibernation. The divine power in her body automatically circulated and healed her injuries. After finishing all of this, Ji Tianxing finally stopped his training. He looked at Yunyao and said with concern, Yao Yao, you've been protecting me for more than 10 days. You must be tired. Go and rest. Yunyao quickly shook her head and persuaded, I'm just watching from the side. I'm not tired. You've been using your secret skill for so long. You're the most tired person. Go and rest. I'll stay here and watch over her. If she wakes up, you'll cause a misunderstanding again. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and nodded. That's good too. After this battle and healing her for more than 10 days, I feel that my strength has broken through again. I'm about to reach a bottleneck. Anyway, she's in hibernation. She won't wake up for at least a month. I'll take advantage of this time to cultivate in seclusion in the divine pagoda and strive to reach the next level. Yun Yao revealed a gratified smile and nodded, and then go quickly. Ji Tianxing didn't delay any longer, and he withdrew the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda before his figure flashed and entered it. Yun Yao reached out with her right hand and grabbed the divine pagoda that was floating in the air. She took it into her palm. Then she sat down cross-legged on the spot. Not far to her left, Lon was lying motionlessly on the ground. She was in a state of hibernation. Once Green Jade Palace woke up, she would know immediately. If Green Jade Palace went crazy again, she could quickly retreat or call Ji Tianxing for help. After Ji Tianxing entered the distorted spacetime, he didn't start cultivating immediately. He flew to the bottom of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree and flew around the sacred tree. The result was as he expected. In the previous battle, countless Divine Lord powerhouses had fallen. The Blood Flame Sacred Tree had absorbed a huge amount of blood energy and divine soul power. It had obviously grown again. Even more than half of the bare branches had sprouted purple sprouts, showing a thriving state. In the past, the Blood Flame Sacred Tree was only 100,000 feet tall. Its branches were bare. But now, the sacred tree had reached a height of more than 12,000 feet. 70 to 80% of its branches had sprouted shoots. In fact, 30% of the branches had sprouted purple leaves. Overall, not only had the Blood Flame Sacred Tree grown taller, it had also become more luxuriant. Its divine power aura had become more vigorous. The blazing blood flames had also become more violent and dazzling. Ji Tianxing walked around the sacred tree and returned to the starting point. He stopped and revealed a gratified smile. He murmured, although this sacred tree is still quasi-king rank at the moment. But with its growth speed, I reckon that it will transform into a true king rank sacred tree in a few years. At that time, this sacred tree will definitely shine with an even more dazzling brilliance. Ji Tianxing had strong confidence and expectations regarding this. He looked around just now. Ji Ku was at the critical moment of breaking through to the 4th level Divine Lord realm. This was a hurdle for her to ascend from a low-level Divine Lord to a middle-level Divine Lord. Of course, it wasn't that easy. But Ji Tianxing had confidence in her talent and believed that she would break through soon. White Dragon, Ji Wushuang, Black Dragon, and Qian Yu were also focused on cultivating. Now they were all low-level Divine Lords. Their strength and foundation weren't deep enough. They knew that Ji Tianxing's cultivation speed was too heaven-defying. It was something that they would never be able to catch up to in this lifetime. Therefore their targets were Ji Ku and Yun Yao. After all, Yun Yao had already broken through to the 4th level Divine Lord realm. Ji Ku was about to reach the 4th level Divine Lord realm too. They didn't want to be left too far behind. They tried their best to increase their strength so that they could protect themselves. In the future, in this dangerous and unpredictable divine world, they would be able to protect themselves and not cause trouble for Ji Tianxing. Seeing that everything was going well and the situation was developing in a good direction, Ji Tianxing was gratified. Therefore he sat cross-legged under the Blood Flame Sacred Tree and began to count the spoils of war. This time he was the final winner in the Green Jade Palace. The 50 factions were the first to discover the Green Jade Palace and spent 10 years to unlock the palace's layers of seals and open the palace's doors. In the end, more than 90% of the more than 400 Divine Lords from the 50 factions had died. In the end, less than 50 escaped the Green Jade Palace alive. Yet they paid such a terrible price and didn't get any benefits at all. And Ji Tianxing monopolized all the treasures. His gains came from 2 aspects. One was the monarch-level materials, divine pills and cultivation technique manuals left behind by Divine King Azure Jade. The second was the divine spark fragments that were scattered in the ruins after countless Divine Lord experts died on the battlefield. As for those monarch-level divine artifacts and equipment, Ji Tianxing couldn't be bothered to collect them. He wouldn't use the divine pills and materials left behind by Divine King Azure Jade for his closed-door cultivation this time. He only needed to refine the divine spark fragments of those divine lord experts and a large number of origin stones and divine stones. It would be enough. An hour later, Ji Tianxing counted the spoils of war and came to a conclusion. There were a total of 132 divine spark fragments. Among them, there were more than 90 high-rank divine lord fragments and more than 40 middle-rank divine lord fragments. Although a portion of the divine spark fragments were incomplete, that didn't affect Ji Tianxing's refinement and absorption of divine Tao laws. After counting, he muttered to himself, "Speaking of which, I have to thank Loner for being able to collect so many divine spark fragments. I didn't kill that many divine lords. Most of them were killed by her." Chapter 32-38. This was the truth. In terms of the number of divine monarchs killed, Ji Tianxing naturally could not compare to Lon. However, those Lon killed were those divine monarchs who were already seriously injured and were not strong enough. Although the number of divine monarchs Ji Tianxing killed was few, they were all the top powerhouses who had survived until the end. For example, Yi Wuji, Prince Lian, Heavenly Union Sect's Grand Elder, and the leaders of the two large sects and families. Very soon he eliminated these distracting thoughts and began to work on refining the divine spark fragments. Under the sacred tree it was quiet. Billions of branches emitted wisps of blood-colored divine power, pouring into Ji Tianxing and the others, assisting them in their cultivation. Time passed quietly. One divine spark fragment after another was refined by Ji Tianxing for his own use. He had already reached the peak of the 8th stage realm. As long as he broke through the bottleneck, he could ascend to the 9th stage of the divine monarch realm. Now his strength was soaring rapidly. The number of divine Tao laws condensed was also constantly increasing. This made his strength grow continuously, becoming stronger and stronger. Imperceptibly, he broke through the bottleneck again and again, advancing towards the 9th stage of the divine monarch realm. 1 day, 5 days, 10 days. Ji Tianxing forgot the passage of time, immersed in the process of constantly becoming stronger. Unknowingly, for years had passed. He had refined all 132 pieces of the God horoscope pieces. From these divine spark fragments, he absorbed 30 types of divine Tao laws, condensing them into his own divine spark. In this way, the number of divine Tao laws he possessed reached a shocking 340. Back then, when the number of laws he grasped broke through the 300 mark, it created an invisible miracle. Now he took another step forward on the path of miracles. In addition, his divine power also reached the limit of the 8th stage realm, finally breaking through the bottleneck. On this day, his entire body bloomed with sacred golden light, bursting forth with a vast and mighty aura. The soaring golden light condensed into 9 dragon shadows, lingering above the blood-flame sacred tree for 2 days before dissipating. Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing had naturally broken through when the conditions were right. He finally reached the 9th stage of the divine monarch realm, not far from the divine monarch realm. After successfully breaking through, he cultivated in seclusion for another 3 months to stabilize his foundation of the divine Tao. By the time he finished cultivating, his strength had increased by more than 5 times, and his aura had become even more mysterious and restrained. He got up and left the distorted space-time, flying out of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Shua. In the next moment, he appeared in the secret chamber and stood beside Yun Yao. And at this moment, the scene in the secret room was something he did not expect. Yun Yao was still as calm as before. She sat cross-legged on the ground, maintaining the posture of circulating her energy and adjusting her breath. However, she did not circulate her energy. Instead, she opened her eyes and looked at Loner, who was on her left. Loner, who should have been lying on the ground in a dormant state, stood up. She arched her back slightly and stared at Yun Yao with a cold and wary gaze, revealing a strong hostility. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing immediately frowned. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward and shielded Yun Yao behind him. This matter started because of him. If anything happened to Yun Yao or if she was hurt by Lon, he would never forgive himself. Fortunately, Lon had no intention of attacking. Ji Tianxing's appearance broke the cold atmosphere in the secret chamber. Lon and Yun Yao's gazes gathered on him. Ji Tianxing frowned and looked at Lon. He asked, "After you took the divine pill, didn't you have to sleep for a month before waking up? It's only been more than 20 days. Why did you wake up in advance? During the period when you were unconscious, Yao Yao had been taking care of you. It's fine if you don't thank her, but you're hostile to her?" Lan's attitude towards Yun Yao made him a little unhappy, so he questioned her. Unexpectedly. Not only did Lan not feel guilty, but she also glanced at Yun Yao with a complicated expression. Then she glanced coldly at Ji Tianqing and smiled bitterly. Her voice was a little sad and cold. Yao Yao. Are you so protective of her? Yes. She's a devastatingly beautiful woman and I am just an ugly and ferocious monster. I understand. Ji Tianqing was speechless. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hey, I'm Tianqing and this is my wife, Yun Yao. What nonsense are you talking about? Why would Lan listen to him? She only heard the two key words and tears immediately gushed out of her eyes. She sneered crazily. Wife. Back then you also said such precious words to me. Now the person you call your wife has become her. While laughing crazily, Lan staggered back as if she was extremely weak and almost fell to the ground. Ji Tianqing was even more depressed. He wanted to explain again. At this time Yun Yao reached out and pulled him, shaking her head at him. Tianqing, Lan is not clear-headed now. She's muddle-headed. Don't say any more. She was abandoned by her lover, suppressed for 10,000 years, and suffered such heavy injuries. Of course, this series of heavy blows will make her emotional. Let her calm down and then we'll explain to her. After listening to Yun Yao's advice, Ji Tianqing naturally nodded and agreed. All right, you're better at this kind of thing. I'll leave it to you. After speaking, Ji Tianqing took a step back and reached out to pull Yun Yao up from the ground. Yun Yao stood on the spot and looked at Lan calmly. Her hands formed a divine seal, releasing thousands of strands of cold moonlight. Miss Lan, your old friend is still here but he hasn't returned. We all know that you're infatuated with him and have no regrets. You've sacrificed too much and suffered too much. But please don't be blinded by resentment. Yun Yao said gently. Her voice was like the spring wind and rain, moisturizing everything silently. Especially the thousands of strands of cold moonlight she quietly released, which had the effect of soothing and cleansing the soul. Lan, who had broken down emotionally and was in a state of madness, quieted down a lot. Her emotions gradually calmed down. Her crying gradually stopped. She leaned against the wall and slowly fell to the ground. She lowered her head weakly and stared blankly at the ground. She didn't say anything. Yun Yao continued to use her divine abilities and secret techniques to soothe Lan's emotions and make her sober up. At the same time she started to guide and enlighten Lan patiently. Miss Lan, your lover is Chao Qingyu. He's also known as God King Blue Jade. No matter how many thousands of years or billions of years have passed, you must still remember him, right? Haha. Lan just sneered and refused to answer this question. Because the answer was without a doubt. Yun Yao's tone and speed didn't change. She continued, Chao Qingyu is a citizen of the Great Yan Empire. He's the God King of the Great Yan divine race. You should be familiar with his bloodline, spirit and aura. How can you be wrong? Lan shook her head and said in a low voice, so what if I'm familiar with him? Time will change everything. Spirit, bloodline and appearance will all change, right? Of course that was because she was the best example. Chapter 32-39. Yun Yao was stunned by Lan's words. She did not know how to refute her. After a moment of silence she continued, even if there are changes, it's impossible for him to become a completely different person. He's a great Yan God King and Tianqing is a human who has yet to reach the God King realm. They were clearly two different people. There was not the slightest bit of similarity between them. How can you confuse the two of them? Lan's head was still lowered. She did not want to look at Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's expressions. After a long silence she said with a bitter voice, I know that in order to save me he went to the outside world to find a way to save me. Although he's a peerless God King he just broke through not long ago. He can't defeat other God Kings. The outside world is dangerous. If he encountered any danger or was attacked by other God Kings, he would most likely meet with misfortune. Perhaps it was because he had encountered a great calamity that he had become a completely different person. He knows that I have an incurable terminal illness. He doesn't want to spend the rest of his life with me but he feels guilty. That's why he returned here with another identity and released me from the Black Dungeon. In this way he can give me my freedom and run away with the person he loves. After hearing this, Ji Tianqing did not know whether to laugh or cry. Even Yun Yao was impressed by her imagination. Miss Lan, Your speculation sounds reasonable, but it doesn't hold water. Chao Qingyu was a God King expert. If he didn't improve in 10,000 years, he should have reached the second or third level of the God King realm, right? However, Tianqing is a 9th level divine lord. He's still far from the God King realm. Lan shook her head again and smiled bitterly. Perhaps he met with a great disaster and narrowly escaped death. His strength regressed. Or perhaps he met with a mishap a few thousand years ago and died. However, his spirit was not destroyed. He reincarnated and started cultivating from the beginning. He had a new life and a beautiful wife. However, after his strength increased and he regained his memories, he felt guilty towards me and came back to look for me. Tianqing was stunned. Yunyao was also stunned. The couple looked at each other and frowned. There was a strange look in their eyes. Is this Lan really crazy, or is she just pretending to be stupid? Why do I feel like she has fiery eyes of truth and is hinting at something else? Apart from the fact that she believed you to be Chao Qingyu, she was completely right about reincarnation. Both of her statements are based on evidence, so it's not easy to refute her. Tianqing's frown deepened as he sent a voice transmission gloomily. She's being so unreasonable. Is she trying to blame me? Yunyao rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, don't be so smug. She's just delirious. Let's think of another way. Tianqing nodded in agreement. Yunyao looked at Lan again. Seeing that she was completely calm and sober, she asked, Miss Lan, although I've told you so much, you still refuse to believe me. How can I prove that Tianqing is not Chao Qingyu? Lan finally raised her head and looked at her and Tianqing. There was a meaningful smile on her face. It's very simple. Ask Chao Qingyu to come and see me. Reveal his true colors and tell me in person that he can't do anything. He's ashamed of me and the promise he made to me is invalid. Only in this way can my obsession be resolved and I won't hate him anymore. Even if I die, I'm willing to bless him to live a good life. These words were obviously from the bottom of Lan's heart. After speaking her mind, she felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Her mind became clearer. Tianqing and Yunyao frowned at the same time. They couldn't help but mutter, isn't this forcing her to do something? 10,000 years have passed. Chao Qingyu is most likely dead. If he's not dead, he should have come back to see you long ago. Lan was unmoved and didn't say anything else. It seemed like she was determined to see Chao Qingyu with her own eyes even if she had to die. Yunyao frowned and was still thinking of other ways. Tianqing was already a little impatient. He said unhappily, Miss Lan, the Great Yan Empire's royal family and the 49 forces were the first to discover this palace. It took them 10 years to open the door of the Green Jade Palace. I chased after my enemy and snuck into the palace when they weren't paying attention. That's how I woke you up. When you were fighting with those godly lords, I found this stone house and found the jade slips and books left behind by Chao Qingyu. That's how we know the story of you and Chao Qingyu. I saved you because I didn't want to feel guilty. After all, I took the materials left behind by Chao Qingyu. Now that your injuries are stable, I'll leave his belongings to you. For even now. After saying that, Tianqing took out more than 100 jade slips, books and golden papers from his interspatial ring and placed them in front of Lan. He only kept the 3 sets of godly monarch materials and returned the rest to Lan. Then he pulled Yunyao and turned to leave. It was a complete waste of time to reason with a crazy person like Lan. However, Lan ignored the jade slips, golden papers and books. Her figure flashed and blocked the door of the secret chamber. She blocked Tianqing and Yunyao's path and looked at them sadly. She said in a low voice, Young Master Tianqing, do you think we're even now? Is that really so? It was your intrusion that woke me up from my 10,000 years of sleep and almost killed me. The only thing that kept me alive was my obsession. Will you really feel at ease if you just leave like this? Tianqing frowned and asked, Then what do you want to do? Without waiting for Lan to answer, Yunyao reminded him telepathically, Actually, she's not crazy. She knows you're not Chao Qingyu, but she wants us to help her find him. As expected, Lan stared at Tianqing and asked, You've seen Chao Qingyu, haven't you? Tianqing was full of vigilance and asked, What nonsense are you talking about? I'm so young. How could I have seen him? He. Lan smiled meaningfully and said in a low voice, About 1,000 years ago you saw Chao Qingyu. Seems that you even fought? Ji Tianxing's eyes suddenly lit up and flashed with a sharp cold light. He was also very vigilant and afraid. Lan Er saw that he was full of vigilance and quickly waved her hand. Don't ask me how I know. It's just a guess. Ji Tianxing of course didn't believe her. He thought to himself, damn it. How does she know this secret? Can she eavesdrop on my thoughts? Or can she spy on my divine soul and memory? If that's the case, it's too scary. Just as the two sides were in a stalemate and Ji Tianxing was hesitating, the gate of the divine palace, which was thousands of miles away, suddenly lit up with a bright divine light and emitted a vigorous fluctuation of divine power. Crack. With a dull noise, the two gates of the divine palace opened. They didn't open from the inside but from the outside. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and Lan Er's divine senses all detected this scene. The three of them changed their expressions immediately. Chapter 3240. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and Lan Er didn't expect that. The gate of the divine palace, which was originally closed, would open from the outside. At that moment, the three of them put aside their previous questions and focused their attention on the gate of the divine palace. The same question popped up in the minds of the three of them. Who opened the gate of the divine palace? Is it Yan Tiangang and the divine emperors of the large sects and families? Or is it someone else? But no matter who it was, if they appeared at this time they would be enemies and not friends. The three of them were very vigilant. They quickly restrained their auras and stayed in the stone house without moving, staring at the gate of the divine palace. The next moment, a dazzling blood-red light flew in from outside the gate. Swoosh! The ball of rising blood-red flames wrapped around a tall and sturdy figure and passed through the gate of the divine palace. Then he fell to the ground with a plop, shaking the ground and stirring up a lot of dust. The tall figure struggled on the ground a few times, but he couldn't get up. But he used his last bit of strength to raise his hand and shoot out a beam of divine light, closing the gate of the divine palace. Bang! The gate of the divine palace closed and the defense divine array resumed its operation. The gate returned to silence. After 20 seconds the figure still fell to the ground. He didn't move or make any sound. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao looked at each other in confusion. However, Yun Yao pulled Ji Tianxing's arm and signaled him to look at Lan Er with her eyes. Ji Tianxing turned his head and saw Lan Er trembling all over. Her claws and lips were trembling. Tears actually gushed out of her blood-red eyes, and her emotions became extremely agitated. Seeing her reaction, Ji Tianxing was stunned. Then he guessed a possibility and couldn't help but exclaim, "It can't be that coincidental, right?" As his voice fell, Lan Er, who was almost crazy, rushed out of the stone house and flew towards the gate of the divine palace. Her injuries had just stabilized and she hadn't fully recovered yet. She was still very weak. Even if she flew across the sky, she was still shaking and not fast enough. However, she completely disregarded her own situation and desperately ran away in tears. Watching her figure disappear into the horizon, Yun Yao revealed a gratified smile and muttered to herself, "Hao Tian does not disappoint the bitter lover. How could a woman as infatuated as her be let down? If it's really the person she's waiting for, then this ending can be considered perfect." Yun Yao was grateful for Lan Er's dedication and devotion. She felt gratified and happy for her. However, Ji Tianxing's expression was a little unnatural. A happy ending? It was for her. But that might not be the case for us. Yao Yao, if that guy is really a Chaoqing, you were in big trouble. Yun Yao turned her head to look at him. She blinked her eyes and laughed softly. "That's right. You almost caused his wife to lose her life and even took away his divine king-level material. How could he let you go?" Ji Tianxing nodded and added, "Furthermore, I met him 1,000 years ago and fought with him. I even gave him some pointers." Yun Yao nodded slightly and her smile became even wider. She teased, "1,000 years ago you were high and mighty. You could give Chaoqing you some pointers with just a few words. Now he's still a divine king, but you've become a divine sovereign. If he recognizes you, how awkward would that be?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and laughed softly. "It's fine. That guy fainted as soon as he flew into the divine palace. He must have suffered some serious injuries. There's nothing to be afraid of." Yun Yao added, "If the situation doesn't go well, we'll sneak away when Lan Er isn't paying attention." The husband and wife echoed each other and made a happy decision just like that. Then the two of them flew out of the stone house and towards the divine palace's gate. 100 breaths later, the husband and wife flew thousands of miles away and landed in front of the divine palace's gate. At this moment Lan was lying on top of the dark red figure, crying her heart out. Seeing Lan crying her heart out and the tall figure covered in blood, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's hearts skipped a beat. What's going on? That guy isn't dead, is he? Is he going to die in front of his own house with his last breath? Ji Tianxing mumbled inwardly. He hastily used his divine perception to check the situation. He heaved a sigh of relief when he discovered that the divine race male was not dead and had only fainted from his injuries. That guy isn't dead. It's just that Lan is too emotional. After saying that, the husband and wife stood at the side and sized up the divine race male who was lying on the ground. This was a 4-meter-tall Great Yen divine race male. He had the typical characteristics and aura of his race. He was tall and sturdy. His skin was dark red and there were 2 pairs of dark red wings on his back. However, one of the wings had been severed at the roots. The wound was hideous and terrifying and blood was still gushing out of it. Moreover, this person's body was covered in wounds. There were more than 100 of them and many of them were fatal. The purple battle armor he wore had long been tattered and riddled with holes. It was also dyed red with blood. Even his head of purple hair was soaked in blood and twisted into knots. Fortunately, he was a godly king expert. His divine body was not destroyed even though he had suffered such terrible injuries. If he was an ordinary person, his divine body would have been reduced to ashes. Based on Lan's reaction, he could tell that this Great Yen divine race male was Chao Qingyu. Ji Tianxing released his divine perception again to check on Chao Qingyu's divine soul injury. However, as soon as his divine perception entered Chao Qingyu's mind, it was shattered by an extremely violent and powerful lightning divine power. Ji Tianxing felt a buzz in his mind. His divine perception was a little dizzy and his vision was blurry. He shook his head and gradually regained consciousness. He blamed himself inwardly. Phew. I was too careless. Chao Qingyu should be a 3rd-level godly king. To be able to injure him to this extent, it must be at least a 4th-level intermediate godly king. Since he's unconscious, his godhead must be severely damaged or even sealed by his opponent's divine power. I should have thought of this earlier. How could I use my divine perception so easily? This was the first time Ji Tianxing came into contact with a godly king expert since he returned to the divine realm. He was used to it and thought that no one could threaten him. However, it was different now. The godly king's power he came into contact with was enough to threaten him. After blaming himself, he thought of more problems and became more vigilant. Yun Yao saw his serious expression and asked, Tianxing, how are godly King Qingyu's injuries? Upon hearing this, Lana held back her tears and looked at Ji Tianxing inquisitively. Ji Tianxing answered without hesitation, his injuries are very serious. Especially the injuries to his godhead. They're even more serious than the injuries to his divine body. It's already incredible that he could hold on until now. There are cracks on his godhead. Unfortunately, it's enveloped by a powerful divine power, so I can't check his condition. This. Yun Yao frowned. She knew that this was a tricky matter. This news was like a bolt from the blue to Lan. She was stunned. Chapter 3241. For Lan, this period of time was really full of ups and downs. First, Ji Tianxing and the 50 factions barged into the divine palace and woke her up from her 10,000 years of slumber. After that, she almost lost her life in the battle, but Ji Tianxing saved her. Under the care of Ji Tianxing and his wife, she recuperated for more than 20 days, and her injuries finally stabilized. However, at this moment the door of the divine palace opened and Chao Qingyu actually returned. Lan could not believe it. She only felt that she was dreaming. She was so excited that her heart almost jumped out of her chest. Even if she was dreaming, she could not believe that after 10,000 years, Chao Qingyu did not abandon her and really returned as promised. However, the heavens were playing a joke on her. Chao Qingyu, who had just rushed into the divine palace, fell to the ground and fainted. Moreover, his injuries were extremely serious and he could die at any time. Most importantly, neither she nor Ji Tianxing could save Chao Qingyu. At this moment Lan fell from heaven to hell. She only felt extremely absurd and desperate. Haotian, why did you do this to me? I was sealed in the darkness for 10,000 years. I endured so much pain and despair before he returned. But why did he end up like this? How can I save him? Lan knelt on the ground and lay on Chao Qingyu's back. She cried heart-wrenchingly and tears flowed like a fountain. Seeing this scene, Yunyao also felt sympathy for Lan. She could not help but turn to Ji Tianxing and ask through voice transmission, "Tianxing, although you have not broken through to the Divine King realm, you should have a way to save Chao Qingyu, right?" Seeing Ji Tianxing frown slightly as if he was considering and weighing the pros and cons, Yunyao advised again, "Lan'er's experience is indeed pitiful. You have an old friendship with Chao Qingyu, of course, this is only my suggestion. The final decision is still up to you." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "You're right. I do have a way to treat his injuries. I trust your intuition. Since you think I can help them, I'll help them again." After he finished speaking, he looked at the heartbroken Lan and said, "Miss Lan, you don't have to be so sad. Chao Qingyu's life is not in danger for now. Also, I will try my best to treat him." Hearing these two sentences, Lan's cries immediately stopped, and her despairing eyes regained their luster. She looked up at Ji Tianxing and asked in disbelief, "You can treat his injuries? Didn't you say earlier that he was injured by a Divine King powerhouse and even you can't investigate?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, "It's unrealistic to directly investigate and treat his injuries. I have to think of a way. Turn him over first and I'll take a closer look at his injuries." Lan'er's mind calmed down a lot. Ji Tianxing was willing to help. At the very least she saw some hope. She hurriedly stretched out her muscular arms and flipped Chao Qingyu, who was lying on the ground, over. Chao Qingyu was lying on the ground with his face facing the sky. His blood-stained purple hair was parted, revealing his true appearance. A chiseled, resolute and dignified square face appeared before everyone's eyes. He had dark red skin, a high nose bridge and thick purple eyebrows. These were the typical characteristics of Great Yan's divine tribe. However, Chao Qingyu was unconscious. His eyes were tightly shut and he could not feel anything. Lan looked at Chao Qingyu's face in a daze. Her heart was filled with worry and anxiety. She slowly stretched out her hand, wanting to touch Chao Qingyu's face. However, she retracted her hand halfway. At this moment, Yunyao suddenly frowned. She pointed at Chao Qingyu's right hand and asked, "Look, what's that in his hand?" Ji Tianxing and Lan looked down and saw Chao Qingyu's right hand clutching his chest. His palm was tightly gripping a jade bottle. Even though he was unconscious, his hand was stiff as he gripped the red jade bottle tightly. It was clear that the jade bottle was very important to him. Lan held Chao Qingyu's hand and pried his fingers open one by one before she removed the jade bottle. She looked at it from head to toe. A puzzled expression appeared on her face as she said, "This jade bottle is exquisitely made. It seems like there's a pill inside. Let me take a look," Ji Tianxing said as he reached out to take the jade bottle. Fortunately, the jade bottle was not sealed with a formation. He opened it easily and poured out a golden pill the size of a broad bean. Swoosh! The divine pill floated in front of everyone. It shone with a dazzling golden light and fluctuated with a vast divine power. The three of them did not need to guess to know that this was definitely a king-grade divine pill. Its effects were extraordinary. Moreover, Chao Qingyu valued this item so much. It was clear that this divine pill might not be a low-grade king-grade divine pill. It was very likely to be a mid-grade king-grade divine pill. If that was the case, then this divine pill was not only a treasure in the Tianbei region. Even in the entire boundless heaven continent, it was an extraordinary treasure that would tempt countless divine kings. Ji Tianxing used the divine eye mystic technique and stared at the dazzling golden divine pill. He observed it in detail. Lan and Yunyao were also full of curiosity as they sized up the divine pill. Suddenly, Lan had a look of realization. She said excitedly, "I understand now. This precious king-grade divine pill can definitely heal Qingyu's injuries. If not, he would not have protected this divine pill at the risk of being seriously injured and unconscious." Lan firmly believed this answer. She hurriedly urged Ji Tianxing and said, "Quickly give this divine pill to Qingyu. His injuries will recover soon." Seeing that Ji Tianxing was unmoved, she could not hold back the anxiety in her heart. She reached out her claws to take the divine pill. However, Ji Tianxing stopped her and shook his head. "You're wrong. This divine pill is not to heal his injuries." Lan retracted her claws and asked Ji Tianxing in confusion, "It can't heal his injuries? How is that possible? Then why is he protecting the jade bottle so tightly?" Ji Tianxing reached out and held the dazzling golden divine pill. He put it back into the jade bottle. He took a deep look at Lan Er and handed the jade bottle to her. He said in a serious tone, "According to my judgment, this king-grade divine pill is to heal you." What? Lan Er was stunned. Her eyes widened and she was petrified like a statue. This sentence had a huge impact on her. She could not believe it. She even suspected that she had heard wrongly. Chao Qingyu had disappeared for 10,000 years. Now he had returned with scars all over his body and his life hanging by a thread. Even though he was unconscious, he still held the jade bottle that contained the divine pill tightly and pressed it against his chest, the place closest to his heart. Because the divine pill in the jade bottle was to heal the person he loved. It was not just a divine pill. It was a vow to his lover. At this moment, Lan Er was trembling all over. Her emotions were on the verge of collapse. However, it was not anger or despair. It was surprise, shock, disbelief, and guilt. Tears gushed out of her eyes. She smiled self-deprecatingly and shouted to herself, "So he never forgot me and never abandoned me. I've wronged him." Chapter 3242. Lan Er finally understood Chao Qingyu's painstaking efforts. For the past 10,000 years, the pain and torment she suffered, as well as the resentment and unwillingness in her heart, instantly collapsed and disintegrated. She even felt guilty and blamed herself for once resenting Chao Qingyu. Chao Qingyu was so loyal to her, but she doubted and resented Chao Qingyu. How could she not feel guilty? After crying and laughing for a while, Lan Er's emotions finally calmed down. She took the jade bottle and held it in her palm like a treasure. She could not help but murmured, Qingyu, why are you so silly? If you have this kind of heart and affection, even if I die, I will have no regrets. If I could choose, I would rather this divine pill be used to treat your injuries." Lan Er's words came from the bottom of her heart and made people sigh with emotion. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and consoled, "Miss Lan Er, Chao Qingyu paid such a terrible price and brought back the divine pill to treat you. What you should do now is to consume this divine pill and treat your injuries as soon as possible and recover to your original appearance. As for Chao Qingyu, leave it to me temporarily. I will think of a way to treat him. I hope that when he wakes up he can see you recovering to your original appearance. That would be the best way to thank him." Lan Er felt that it made sense and nodded solemnly, "You're right. He sacrificed so much for me. How can I disappoint him? I'll consume the divine pill now to treat my injuries. Qingyu's injuries. I'll leave it to you." After speaking, Lan Er bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not delay any longer and said, "Let's go. Let's all go to the stone house." After that, Lan Er carried the unconscious Chao Qingyu and everyone flew back to the stone house. After entering the stone house, Lan Er entered the secret chamber and started to circulate her energy to regulate her breathing. After she was ready, she consumed the dazzling gold divine pill and circulated her energy to refine the medicinal strength. At this time, Ji Tianxing placed Chao Qingyu in the alchemy room and began to circulate his energy to save her. Although he had not reached the Divine King realm, he could not treat Chao Qingyu directly. However, he placed Chao Qingyu in the middle of the array where the cauldron was. Then he activated the divine formation that Chao Qingyu had set up years ago and used the power of the king-grade divine formation to heal Chao Qingyu's injuries. Of course, Chao Qingyu's king-grade divine formation was of a lower grade and had no healing properties. Ji Tianxing made some adjustments to the divine formation and used the power of the 3 king-grade materials to achieve this amazing effect. He focused on casting his divine powers and channeled his divine powers into Chao Qingyu's divine body with the help of the divine formation. Under his meticulous treatment, the external injuries on Chao Qingyu's divine body were slowly healing. 1 day, 3 days, 5 days. 6 days passed quickly. Chao Qingyu's injuries were mostly healed and he no longer looked as wretched and ferocious as before. However, his internal injuries and the damage to his godhead were still there. The powerful divine powers that enveloped his godhead were still there. Thus, Ji Tianxing used the power of the 3 king-grade materials to channel the divine powers in Chao Qingyu's mind. This time he finally saw it clearly. The Divine King's divine powers was a dazzling divine light of 5 different colors. There were countless strands of divine lightning flashing within it, as well as the raging divine flames of the burning heavens. There was also the cold and sharp light of the stars, as well as a terrifying multicolored poison. Divine powers of various attributes mixed together and filled Chao Qingyu's mind, enveloping his godhead. Because of this, Chao Qingyu was still unconscious and could not wake up. Moreover, his divine powers were constantly weakening. The injuries to his godhead and divine soul could not heal on their own. After understanding the situation, Ji Tianxing could not help but frown. Who is the divine king that injured Chao Qingyu? His methods and strength are indeed extraordinary. Fortunately, Chao Qingyu's divine will is extremely tenacious. That is why he can hold on until now. If it were someone else, their godhead would have been further damaged and they would not be far from death. Yun Yao, who was beside him, asked worriedly, Tianxing, is there a way to heal him? At the very least, it would be good to wake him up. Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, a divine king's divine soul and will are extremely powerful. As long as the divine light in his mind is removed, he should be able to wake up very quickly. If I recover to the divine king realm, I will be able to disperse the divine light directly. But now I can only rely on the power of a divine treasure. Yun Yao thought for a moment and immediately understood what he meant. She asked, you mean, the heaven-mending pearl? That's right. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. Then he activated the heaven-mending pearl's power and used the devouring divine ability. He unleashed a sacred white light vortex that enveloped Chao Qingyu's head. This move was indeed effective. The divine power in Chao Qingyu's mind was left behind by a mid-level divine king. Its power was incomparably strong and could be said to be destructive. If Ji Tianxing activated the devouring divine power, his divine body would definitely explode. But when he activated the heaven-mending pearl, it became easy. The heaven-mending pearl's divine power locked onto that five-colored divine light and devoured it bit by bit. After a short 6 hours, the divine power in Chao Qingyu's mind was completely devoured by the heaven-mending pearl. Chao Qingyu's mind regained clarity. His godhead was also no longer suppressed and started to slowly heal itself. And Ji Tianxing temporarily sealed that terrifying five-colored divine power in the heaven-mending pearl to be refined in the future. After being purified by the heaven-mending pearl, that mid-level divine king's divine power will become pure energy. When I need it, I can refine it for my own use to increase the power of the divine lightning, divine fire, and poison laws. It's good to have the heaven-mending pearl. Can help Chao Qingyu heal and also help me absorb divine power. These thoughts flashed through his mind. Ji Tianxing was rather gratified and used the art to treat Chao Qingyu's internal injuries. Soon another 7 days passed. Ji Tianxing continuously used the art for 7 days and supplemented it with a large number of supreme-grade monarch-grade divine pills. Finally, Chao Qingyu's internal injuries stabilized. Next, only the godhead and divine soul injuries were left. Ji Tianxing had a way to treat this. However, the effort and the reward could not be proportional. It was extremely cumbersome and complicated. After thinking about it, he decided to let Chao Qingyu heal itself in a deep sleep. When he stopped, Yun Yao looked at him with concern and asked, you must be tired after continuously using the art for so many days, right? Quickly take a rest. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a serious expression, Chao Qingyu's internal and external injuries have stabilized. He won't be in danger. I can treat the godhead's injuries, but it's very troublesome and will take too long. It's better to let him heal himself. I thought of something and can't help but worry. What is it? Yun Yao asked doubtfully. Ji Tianxing revealed a worried expression and said in a low voice, judging from Chao Qingyu's injuries, the person who injured him must be a mid-level divine king. An expert of this level must be second to none in the northern heaven region. No one can control him. Moreover, when Chao Qingyu returned to the divine palace, it seemed like he was being pursued. That's why he ran for his life and had no time to treat his injuries. Hearing this, Yun Yao instantly understood what he meant and revealed a worried expression. Chapter 3243. Tianxing, you mean, there's a mid-level god king chasing after Chao Qingyu, so he's busy running for his life and has no time to treat his injuries? Yun Yao furrowed her brows, her face full of worry. In that case, the mid-level god king chasing after Chao Qingyu might be arriving soon? He might even have arrived at the Cloud Sea Mystic Realm and is about to attack the Green Jade Palace? Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said earnestly, although this is just my speculation, we have to be on guard. Yun Yao nodded in agreement and asked, Chao Qingyu is injured like this, he definitely won't wake up in a short time. A mid-level god king might appear at any time. We definitely can't stop him. Tianxing, what do you plan to do? Tianxing's combat power was extremely strong, comparable to a second-level God King. But against a mid-level God King he still had no chance of winning. He might even lose his life. Under such circumstances, even if he chose to escape from the Green Jade Palace, it was also reasonable. Yun Yao would not object. After all, they had already helped Lan and Chao Qingyu to this extent. They had already done everything they could. However, Tianxing did not think of escaping. He said in a serious tone, "With my current strength and Chao Qingyu's current condition, of course, we can't be discovered by that mid-level God King. The divine formation that Chao Qingyu set up back then was a little simple. I plan to modify the palace's defensive formation. This will make the palace more hidden and not easy to discover. Its defensive power will also be stronger. In this way, even if a mid-level God King really comes after us, we can resist for a while." Yun Yao thought for a while and nodded in agreement. This is a good idea. It's also the most feasible method at present. After pausing for a while, she asked again, "Tianxing, the reason why you stayed and were willing to help Lan and Chao Qingyu, was it because you wanted to wait for Chao Qingyu to wake up?" Of course, Tianxing wouldn't hide it and nodded at her. Yun Yao confirmed her guess and continued, "Chao Qingyu is a real deity king. He has been wandering outside for tens of thousands of years. He must have been to many places in the God realm. You've always wanted to investigate the structure of the God realm, as well as the situation outside the boundless heaven continent. When Chao Qingyu wakes up we can ask him, right?" Tianxing revealed a gratified smile and nodded. "You know me the best." Yun Yao also smiled faintly and said, "Since that's the case, let's not waste any more time. Let's start modifying the defensive array as soon as possible." In other words, she obviously wanted to help Tianxing. Tianxing thought for a moment and said, "Other than you, I still have to wake everyone up and help me modify the divine formation. Only then can I finish it in the shortest time possible." Yun Yao naturally agreed. Following that, Tianxing took out the divine battleship and woke up Lin Shui, God Lord Blood Illusion, left Emissary Jean, Blood Dragon Right Emissary, and Ye Feiyun, who were cultivating in seclusion. After everyone left the divine battleship one after another and appeared in the stone house, Tianxing woke everyone in the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Ji Ku, White Dragon, Ji Wushuang, and Zhen Hong, who had just broken through to the 4th level Divine Lord realm not long ago, also appeared in the stone house one after another. What was worth mentioning was that Zhen Hong had been in seclusion in the Divine Pagoda for so long. His strength had increased greatly again and was not far from the 6th level Divine Lord realm. With so many Divine Lords gathered in the stone house, it immediately became a little crowded. Everyone's gazes gathered on Tianxing. They all opened their mouths and asked, "Sir Tianxing, what instructions do you have for waking us up? Sir, is there anything we can help with?" Tianxing gave a simple explanation of the current situation to everyone. "Currently we're in the Azure Jade Divine Palace. Lan consumed the divine elixir and is in seclusion to recuperate. Chao Qingyu's injuries are too severe and he's still in a deep sleep. The Divine King powerhouses pursuing Chao Qingyu might appear at any time. We have to modify the Divine Palace's defensive array at the fastest speed." After hearing that, everyone understood the importance and urgency of the matter. They all revealed solemn expressions. Tianxing did not delay any longer either. He led everyone and flew toward the Divine Palace's main door. Zoosh! Everyone flew across the sky at lightning speed. Before long they arrived at the Divine Palace's main door. Even though the 1,000 feet tall lofty door was tightly shut, the divine array on the door was still operating. But everyone was well aware that this door was still not secure enough. Tianxing cast the Divine Eye Mystic Art and stared at the Divine Palace's main door without blinking. He carefully observed the defensive divine array on the door and pondered on how to improve it. Before he entered the Divine Palace, he had already observed this divine array. He was very familiar with the structure of the array. Now, after frowning and pondering for an hour, he decided on a modification plan. The array on the Divine Palace's main door is only a low-grade king-level divine array. Its structure and level are relatively simple. If a mid-level divine king came, he would probably be able to break through it within 50 moves. I want to superimpose 5 different low-grade king-level divine arrays on top of this divine array. When the 6 divine arrays are combined into one, Its complexity and defensive power will almost reach the mid-grade king level. Ji Tianxing looked at Yun Yao, Ji Ku and everyone else. He said in a serious tone, although we are all Sir Gods, none of us can set up a king-level divine array. But if all of you help us, we can set up a king-level divine array together. After hearing what he said, everyone was energized. They shouted excitedly, Young Master Tianxing, please instruct us. We will listen to your instructions on how to set up the array. Although they did not know how to set up a king-level divine array, they could listen to Ji Tianxing's instructions and work together to set up the array. Hence, Ji Tianxing led everyone into the sky and started to cast the array. He stood at the highest point and was in the center. Everyone obeyed his orders and spread out in all directions, standing in different positions. Ji Tianxing formed a divine seal with both hands. As he waved thousands of divine lights towards the towering door, he shouted loudly. Yao Yao Gentle Wind 7 Kills Position, 36 Spiral Seals. Cuckoo Gen Thunder Heavenly Fire Position, 39,000 Butterfly Seals. Lin Shui Heaven Life North Position 42 Spectral Seals. As he called out their names one by one, he stated their positions and the requirements for casting the divine seals. Everyone started to move. Everyone's expression was serious. They were fully focused and did their best to cast the array. They did not dare to make any mistakes, because everyone knew that if anyone made a mistake it would affect the others. It might even affect the entire array and cause it to collapse. At this moment, everyone was working together sincerely. With Ji Tianxing as the center, they were tightly united. An invisible sense of pride and trust filled everyone's hearts. Of course, as the person in charge of the array, Ji Tianxing was in control of the overall situation. Not only did he need to be extremely intelligent and knowledgeable, but he also needed to expend a huge amount of divine power. As time passed, millions of divine power rays were injected into the door of the divine palace. The defensive divine array of the divine palace gradually changed. Its power was also slowly increasing. Chapter 3244. Originally, with Ji Tianxing's ability, it would take him at least 7 days to set up a lower king-grade divine array. However, with everyone working together, it only took them 20 hours to complete the task. Although everyone had been concentrating and casting the array with all their might, they were a little tired. However, when the first divine dragon slaying formation was completed, everyone was excited. They revealed an incomparably proud and excited expression. Even left emissary Jin, right emissary blood dragon, Nie Feiyun and the rest could not help but exclaim, "Oh my God! This is unbelievable! We are all Sir Gods and we can set up a king-grade divine array? This is just like a dream. Who would believe it? This is a miracle. Mr. Tianxing is too demonic." He had actually mastered such a complicated and profound king-grade divine formation to its fullest extent. Even if he split the array into more than 10 parts, he could still piece it together neatly. This is simply too terrifying. Even a real supreme being might not be able to do it. It was no wonder that everyone was so excited and found it unbelievable. This was because everyone knew that a second or third degree supreme being could set up a lower king-grade divine array quickly, and it was nothing strange. However, with more than 10 Sir Gods working together, it was a shocking miracle to be able to set up a lower king-grade divine array in a day. After all, godly lords and godly kings had different levels of strength and control over arrays. Moreover, the Sir Gods did not know how to set up a king-grade divine array. However, Ji Tianxing had split the array into more than 10 parts and commanded everyone to cast the array at the same time. In the end, he was able to piece together more than 10 simple divine arrays and restore them to the original king-grade divine array. This was a heaven-defying method. Everyone couldn't help but guess exactly how terrifying Ji Tianxing's attainments in the Tao of formations were. Was he really a Sir God? From his various demonic performances, he was obviously an unparalleled supreme being. Seeing that everyone was excited, they were exclaiming and discussing excitedly. Ji Tianxing asked everyone to take elixirs and recuperate for 2 hours to recover their energy and strength. Anyway, everyone had an astonishing amount of wealth. There were all kinds of elixirs and cultivation resources that could not be used up. Everyone quickly calmed down and sat cross-legged in the sky. They each took out elixirs and divine stones and began to regulate their breathing. Very quickly 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing then ordered everyone to scatter around him, each occupying a specific position. After everyone was in formation, he led everyone to start setting up the second divine formation. The second king-grade low-grade divine array was called Star Destroyer. It was also a complicated, profound, and extraordinary divine formation. However, Ji Tianxing used his superb talent in array formation to divide it into a dozen parts and directed everyone to set up the array formation. With their previous experience, everyone felt much more relaxed and smoother when they set up the array. Moreover, when they were circulating and adjusting their breathing just now, everyone sensed that their strength had improved again, and they also had a new understanding of the divine Dao cultivation. Everyone understood that it was because they had participated in the setting up of the king-grade divine formation. This unprecedented and novel challenge broadened their horizons and allowed their strength to rise to the next level. Therefore Lin Shui, Zhenhong, Nie Feiyun and the others were grateful to Ji Tianxing. Before they knew it, a day had passed. The second Star Destroyer divine formation was also completed and superimposed on the door of the divine palace. Everyone had used up more divine power and their spirits were also more tired. This time Ji Tianxing asked everyone to circulate and adjust their breathing for 4 hours. After 4 hours, when everyone had recovered their strength, they began to set up the array again in high spirits. The third divine formation was called Sky Splitter, and its difficulty had obviously increased. Fortunately, everyone had the experience of setting up the previous 2 arrays. Their control of divine power and positioning had also reached a more subtle level, and their coordination with Ji Tianxing was better. Therefore, they did not disappoint Ji Tianxing and completed the array within 24 hours. After taking elixirs and adjusting their breathing for 6 hours, everyone began to set up the fourth divine formation. The result was still the same and it was completed within a day. The fifth divine formation was the last step and also the most important one. Whether the 5 divine formations set up by everyone and the original divine formation on the door of the divine palace could be integrated seamlessly and form a new and powerful divine formation depended on this. Not only did Ji Tianxing attach great importance to this, but everyone also gave it their all, not daring to be the slightest bit careless. Time passed quietly. Everyone was immersed in setting up the divine formation and forgot about themselves. This was the most difficult one and it took the longest time. After 2 full days, the 5th divine formation was completed. At that moment, a mysterious change occurred on the door of the divine palace. 6 layers of light shields appeared on the surface of the door. Each layer was as thick as a palm, flashing with dazzling divine light and emitting terrifying divine power fluctuations. Under everyone's gaze, billions of veins appeared on each layer of light shield. They were like densely packed nerves and blood vessels gently wriggling. At this moment, the veins and structure of the 6 king-grade divine formations were clearly displayed. Then, under everyone's expectant gaze, the 6 layers of light shields began to ripple, rotate, and twist, gradually merging. Swoosh, swoosh. Divine light flashed and all kinds of strange lights and shadows appeared one after another. The 6 layers of light shields kept gathering, twisting and folding and gradually merging together. As time passed, the number of light shields kept decreasing from 6 layers to 5, 4, 3. Of course, as the number of light shields decreased, their thickness kept increasing, and their power also skyrocketed. When everyone saw this amazing scene, they all revealed shocked, excited, and expectant expressions. Young Master Tianxing's methods are really amazing. Such shocking array formation attainments, comparable to an unparalleled Supreme God King, unparalleled in the world. Not to mention the great Yan Empire, even in the entire Tianbei region, no one can compare to him. When the 6 divine formations merge, it will definitely evolve into an even more powerful divine formation. Even a middle-level Supreme God King can be blocked outside. Everyone discussed excitedly and their admiration for Ji Tianxing grew. Unknowingly 2 hours passed. The 6 layers of defensive light shields had all merged, becoming a super divine formation half a meter thick. This extremely sturdy and thick divine formation flickered with colorful divine light, and there were thousands of divine dragons and lightning shadows on its surface. Even though the divine formation's power was restrained, it still made everyone wary and fearful. One could imagine how terrifying this divine formation's power was when it was fully unleashed. Ji Tianxing also heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He smiled and said, "Finally, I did not disappoint everyone and successfully evolved this reincarnation-killing formation. Thank you for your full support. No one dared to claim credit, and they hurriedly waved their hands to express that it was not hard. Because everyone understood that the most mentally exhausted person was him. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a few beams of divine light, causing the colorful light shield to disappear and be restrained within the palace gate. Then he explained to everyone, although this reincarnation killing formation is only a middle-grade king-grade divine formation, it is complex and mysterious. Ordinary middle-level supreme god kings may not be able to crack it. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3245. Ji Tianxing explained the effects and power of the samsara killing formation to everyone so that he could reassure them. Otherwise, why would they follow him and stay in the Green Jade Palace? If they were not confident, once a middle divine king barged in, Ji Tianxing and everyone else's lives would be in danger. Since Ji Tianxing was confident in the samsara killing formation, everyone did not worry too much. Seeing that everyone was tired and weak, Ji Tianxing said, "Everyone must be exhausted after helping me set up the formation. Go back and rest." Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, Nye Fei Yun and the rest did not think too much. Everyone nodded to show that they understood and entered the divine ship to rest. After Bai Long and Ji Wushuang entered the divine pagoda and returned to the distorted spacetime to rest, only Yun Yao and Ji Ku were left beside Ji Tianxing. The two ladies were not in a hurry to return to the divine pagoda to rest. They looked at Ji Tianxing and asked the question in their hearts. "Brother Tianxing, we only modified the formation at the entrance of the palace. Are you sure it'll work?" "Tianxing, even if the formation at the entrance of the palace is strengthened, the defensive formation that envelopes the palace is still a little weak." Ji Tianxing looked at the two of them and smiled. "You know me well. You are also very attentive and considerate. That's right, it's not enough to strengthen the entrance of the palace. I still have to strengthen the defensive formation. However, the defensive formation that envelopes the palace has a radius of 200 miles. It's not easy to strengthen and modify this divine formation." Yun Yao added, "Moreover, everyone has been setting up the formation for so many days. They can't take it anymore. Therefore you want everyone to go back and rest. Do you plan to strengthen the defensive formation alone?" Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he admitted it. Ji Ku said worriedly, "Brother Tianxing, you are so considerate of everyone. But what about you? You first helped Chao Qingyu to treat her injuries. After that you did not rest and focused on setting up the samsara killing formation. You must be tired after so many days. Let us help you." Yun Yao hurriedly nodded and said with concern, "It's too tiring for you to reinforce the defensive formation alone, and it won't be efficient. It'll be faster if we work together." The two of them were so considerate of him and even strongly requested to help him. How could he refuse? Therefore Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement and said with relief, "The people who understand me the most are the two of you. All right, let's move together then." After that, Ji Tianxing led Yun Yao and Ji Ku to observe the defensive array of the divine palace. The defensive light shield that enveloped the entire divine palace was like a huge ball of light suspended in the vast sea of clouds. The defensive power of this light barrier was extraordinary, and its structure was also rather complicated. There were as many as 140 million meridians. Even with Ji Tianxing's God's Eye secret technique, it took him half a day to figure out the structure of the array. He racked his brains and his brain spun rapidly. He thought about what kind of divine array and method he could use to reinforce and strengthen the defensive array. Within 2 hours he tried more than 10 divine arrays and methods, and made hundreds of deductions and predictions. Finally he succeeded in finding a way. Use the reverse cutting and merging method. Merge the black tortoise divine ceiling formation into this defensive array from 12 different directions. The success rate of this method should be above 90%. Once it succeeds, the defensive array's power will increase by more than 3 times. Although there's still a gap between it and a king-grade divine array, it's better now. Even if there's a godly king expert who can decipher it, it'll still take more time and methods. Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. After making up his mind, he told Yun Yao and Ji Ku his train of thought and the method of setting up the array. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were both proud daughters who had received the godly king's inheritance. They were extremely talented and intelligent. Ji Tianxing only explained it once and they understood. After confirming that there were no problems, the 3 of them flew into the sky. They each took a position and started to cast the array together. Of course, Ji Tianxing was still the leader in the process of casting the array. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The three of them looked solemn. They formed hand seals and kept releasing beams of divine power. Thousands of beams of divine power shot into the southeast corner of the five-colored canopy like sharp arrows. The three of them cast the array continuously for an hour and opened up a 1,000-foot-long gap in the southeast corner of the canopy. This was the first step of setting up the array. They had to cut open the defensive array of the divine palace. Then Ji Tianxing and the other two released divine light into the gap and formed a small black tortoise divine ceiling formation. This was the second step, the so-called merging of the points. After an entire day, the small black tortoise divine ceiling formation was completed and gradually merged into the canopy. The gap also closed. Such a scene made Ji Tianxing's spirits rise. He said with a heart full of gratification, "As I expected, this method is feasible." However, he did not let his guard down. This was because he had to cut open 12 gaps in the five-colored canopy from different directions and merge the 12 small black tortoise divine ceiling formations into it. This way, the 12 small black tortoise divine ceiling formations would form the complete black tortoise divine ceiling formation. At that time, the black tortoise divine ceiling formation would completely merge with the five-colored canopy and the defensive array of the divine palace would be strengthened. Only then would it be considered a success. On the first day, Ji Tianxing and the other two completed 1/12 of the array. On the second day, they repeated the same trick and opened another gap in another direction to merge the small divine ceiling formation. The third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. As time passed, day after day passed. On the morning of the 11th day, Ji Tianxing and the other two merged the 10 small divine ceiling formations into the canopy. In 2 more days the mission would be completed. Although the three of them were very tired, they stubbornly persevered when they thought that success was right in front of them. After the transformation of the array was completed, they could rest and recuperate. However, things did not go as they wished. On this morning, when the sun rose from the east, a group of uninvited guests arrived at the gates of the Green Jade Palace. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A dazzling 5-colored divine light enveloped more than 20 figures and landed in the sea of clouds outside the gates. After the dazzling divine light faded, 23 god race experts appeared. If Ji Tianxing saw these people, he would definitely be shocked. Because these people were Yan Tiangang and the divine lords of the other major sects. However, all of them were severely injured. They looked miserable and wretched, and their expressions were filled with grief and indignation. They maintained a respectful posture as they looked at the 30-meter-tall god race expert in bronze armor and wielding a halberd in the middle of the crowd. "Honorable Divine King, we have arrived. This is the Green Jade Palace." Without a doubt, that thick-bodied alien god race with rock-like skin was a god king expert. As for Yan Tiangang and the divine lords of the various sects, they had been captured by him and had no choice but to obey his orders. The alien race divine king stepped out of the crowd and sized up the Green Jade Palace with a cold gaze. A cruel and sinister smile curled on his lips. "Damned thief, I crossed the sea to kill you. Now that I've found your lair, let's see where you can escape to." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3246. The alien god king's head was large and his face was square as if it was made of stone. Apart from the coldness in his eyes, the cruel smile on his face was not obvious. After all, a god race clansman with stony skin like him had facial paralysis. It would only be obvious if he made an exaggerated expression or action. There was almost no reaction on his face if he made a subtle expression. Although it seemed a little funny. However, Yan Tiangang and the many godlords did not dare to laugh. They all maintained a respectful posture and stood with their heads lowered. It could not be helped. Their previous experience had given them an indelible shock and fear. Many godlords did not want to recall that scene. Whenever they thought of it, they would tremble in fear. This matter had to be explained half a month ago. That evening the sun was setting. The last rays of the setting sun shone on the mountains. Yan Tiangang and 24 godlords were flying above the mountains, rushing towards the great Yan imperial capital. At that time, they were only a few 100,000 miles away from the imperial capital. They would arrive in 4 hours. Now that they were about to return to the imperial capital, they were very relaxed and had long since let down their guard. Previously, They had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Ji Tianxing in the Green Jade Palace and were humiliated. In order to survive, Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the 4 major sects and the noble families worked together to stop Ji Tianxing and cover the escape of 20 god lords. These 25 god lords escaped the Green Jade Palace at their fastest speed and managed to save their lives. However, their injuries were very serious and they were extremely weak. After escaping the Cloud Sea secret realm and flying southeast for 7 days, they could not hold on any longer. Under Yan Tiangong's arrangement, they hid in a secluded place and recuperated for 10 days. When their injuries stabilized and they recovered more than half of their strength, they continued to rush back to the imperial capital. Along the way they did not dare to let down their guard, guarding against Ji Tianxing at all times. Now they were about to return to the imperial capital, and Ji Tianxing had not appeared yet. Everyone secretly sighed in relief, rejoicing that they had survived a disaster. Of course, the leaders of the 4 major sects and noble families had discussed this with Yan Tiangang. This time, everyone had suffered such a huge setback in the Green Jade Palace. Not only did they suffer heavy losses, they were also humiliated to the point that they were covered in cuts and bruises. No matter what, they had to find Ji Tianxing for revenge. The 5 top experts gathered together to discuss countermeasures and plans, secretly plotting how to deal with Ji Tianxing. But at this moment, a strange person suddenly appeared in the sky to the left of the team. It was a giant that was 10 feet tall and looked like an iron tower. He was wearing a bronze armor that was mottled with rust, and he was dragging an ancient halberd that was covered in rust. This person looked very strange. His face, neck and hands under the armor seemed to be made of stone. As a result, his entire person was like a small mountain of stone, extremely sturdy and heavy, giving off an extremely strong sense of oppression. However, even though he looked heavy and clumsy, his speed was frighteningly fast as he flew through the sky. The way he traveled was also very special. Unlike the many Sir Gods, who were covered in divine light and streaked across the sky as fast as lightning, he simply took a step forward and ran across the sky. However, with every step he took he could teleport 1,000 miles away. Moreover, he could continuously teleport and teleport again and again. It was as though he didn't know fatigue and his divine power would never dry up. Seeing this scene, Yan Tiangang and the other Sir Gods were shocked and in disbelief. From what they knew, even a peak Sir God could only teleport 10 times consecutively at most, a distance of no more than 10,000 miles. After teleporting 10 times, they would have to circulate and regulate their breathing. Otherwise, their divine power would be greatly depleted and their divine body would be damaged. However, the stone giant in bronze armor wasn't affected at all. Yan Tiangang and the other Sir Gods were surprised. At the same time, they realized that the stone giant's strength was extremely terrifying. He definitely surpassed the Sir God realm and was a legendary godly king expert. Thinking of this, everyone was overwhelmed with emotions. They were filled with excitement and couldn't help but exclaim. The same thought appeared in the minds of many people. Oh my God! Godly King! An unparalleled godly king has appeared. The legendary godly king expert has appeared. I'm actually lucky enough to see it with my own eyes. In our great Yan Empire, we haven't seen a godly king expert for at least 3,000 years. To be able to see it with my own eyes today is a great blessing. We've seen a godly king with our own eyes. We're really lucky. When I return, I'm going to tell the others. I'm so proud. Everyone was excited. Only Yan Tiangang and the leaders of the 4 major sects and families calmed down quickly after their excitement. They had a bad premonition and frowned. Why would a godly king expert come to the great Yan Empire for no reason? Moreover, looking at the movement of that foreign race godly king, he seems to be heading toward the imperial capital. A godly king expert is enough to destroy the entire imperial capital. Why is that godly king going to the imperial capital? He wouldn't be harmful to the empire, right? The other Sir Gods didn't have much foresight and were only interested in being excited. However, Yan Tiangang and the 4 leaders had different statuses. Naturally, they had more foresight and thought more. They didn't know if their worries were effective or if they were unlucky enough. Thousands of miles away, the stone giant that was teleporting crazily suddenly stopped. He stood in the sky and slowly turned around, looking at everyone with an indifferent gaze. Actually, a godly king expert's divine sense was very powerful. He had already sensed Yan Tiangang and the others when they were 70,000 miles away. However, he seemed to be thinking about something and ignored Yan Tiangang and the others. However, it was different now. As the two sides got closer, the stone giant discovered that Yan Tiangang and the others were all peak high god lords. Moreover, they were all dressed luxuriously and had extraordinary bearings. They were obviously people in power. Thus, the stone giant turned around and flew toward them. Yan Tiangang and the 20 Sir Gods immediately stopped in their tracks. Even the dumbest person would realize that something was wrong. They turned around without hesitation and ran with all their might. However, it was all in vain. Just as they were about to scatter and run, the stone giant waved his bronze halberd and released a dark golden divine light that covered the sky. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh swoosh! The bright dark golden divine light formed a halo of light that covered an area of 500 miles and descended from the sky. Swoosh! Just like that, a dark golden curtain that covered an area of 500 miles was formed in the blink of an eye. Before they could run, they were enveloped by the golden light curtain. They rushed to the edge of the light curtain and attacked it with all their might, trying to create an opening to escape. However, they were overestimating themselves. The golden light curtain was very tough. Even if they used all their strength, they couldn't shake it in the slightest. Under everyone's worried and fearful gazes, the stone giant arrived above the light curtain and looked down with a sinister smile. Strong ants, I am very happy to meet you. From now on, you are all under the command of the mighty Yan King. Chapter 3247. The stone giant's voice was sonorous and forceful. Sounded like metal clashing against metal. This was a special characteristic of his race. It made his voice even more penetrative and intimidating. Yan Tiangang and the other divine lords finally knew that he was called the Yank Divine King. Even though the words strong ant sounded particularly harsh to the ears, it was still not enough for them. However, when the Sir Gods thought about it, they felt relieved. To a Divine King expert, everyone below the Divine King level was an ant. The Divine King level was the peak of this world. It was a powerful existence at the top of the food chain. Although Yan Tiangang and the other Divine Lords were very close to the Divine King level, there was still a big gap between them and the Divine King level. At best, they could only be considered as a slightly stronger ant. Yan Tiangang and the other Divine Lords didn't feel angry or humiliated. They only felt fear in their hearts. They were worried and anxious about what would happen next. At this critical moment, Yan Tiangang was still able to remain calm. He calmly looked at the Yank Divine King and said in a neither servile nor overbearing tone, "Lord Yank Divine King from afar, this is the territory of the Great Yan Empire. The Great Yan Empire welcomes guests who come from afar. Especially a distinguished Divine King like you, who is an honored guest of our empire. Please remove this seal, Yank Divine King. We are willing to serve you if you have any orders." Yan Tiangang lowered his attitude and showed sufficient respect to the Yank Divine King. The leaders of the 4 great sects and families also understood why Yan Tiangang did this and agreed. After all, they couldn't afford to offend the Divine King in front of them. They could only treat him well. If they angered him, they would all be in trouble. Yan Tiangang thought that since he was so humble, the Yank Divine King would at least show some respect, right? As expected, the Yank Divine King stared at Yan Tiangang. After carefully sizing him up, a playful smile appeared on his face. He waved his hand and removed the light screen that covered the sky. He said with a smile, "Very good. Old man, you are very tactful. The imperial capital of the Great Yan Empire is 500,000 miles ahead, right? Judging from the direction you're flying, you should be heading to the imperial capital as well?" After the dark golden light screen was removed, Yan Tiangang and the other divine sovereigns heaved a sigh of relief. Yan Tiangang hurriedly answered Yang's question. "That's right. The imperial capital is 500,000 miles ahead. We also need to return to the imperial capital. If I may be so bold as to ask, Your Majesty, are you also going to the imperial capital? What's the matter?" Hee. The Yank Divine King grinned coldly and his tone became even more mocking. "A lowly dog thief stole a treasure that I treasured as much as my own life and fled to this empire. This king wants to take back the treasure and tear him to shreds. However, that bastard had gone into hiding. This king needs a lot of helpers to help this king find that bastard." Yan Tiangang and the other divine lords were all smart people. They immediately understood what God King Yank meant. He was going to the imperial capital to recruit strong men. Everyone could imagine that the simplest and most effective method was for the Yang Divine King to storm the palace and take control of the great Yan Emperor. This way, the Yang Divine King would be able to control the power of the great Yan Empire and order countless experts to serve him. When he thought of this, Yan Tiangang became vigilant. The Yang Divine King swept his gaze across Yan Tiangang and the others. He continued, "Judging from your strength and attire and what you said just now, if I'm not wrong, you're all the top nobles of the great Yan Empire, right? Tell me your identities or I'll... You know what I mean." Everyone felt a chill run down their spines when his gaze swept across them. They were frightened and uneasy. The leaders of the 4 sects and aristocratic families hesitated for a moment before answering truthfully, "Your Majesty, I'm the sect master of the Heaven Origin sect. The Heaven Origin sect is one of the 6 great sects of the Empire." "Your Majesty, I'm the sect master of the Heaven Opening sect. The Heaven Opening sect is also one of the 6 great sects of the Empire." "Your Majesty, I'm the sect master of Towering Wind Pavilion. I'm Lei Xianxia, the current head of the Lei family. Our Lei family has a history of more than 21,000 years and is one of the 4 great aristocratic families of the Empire." After hearing the answers of the 4 experts, the Yang Divine King knew that he had guessed correctly. These people were all the top nobles and experts. Thus he looked at Yan Tiangang with a burning gaze and asked, "What about you? Who are you?" Yan Tiangang hesitated for a moment before answering respectfully, "Your Majesty, I'm also one of the sect masters of the 6 great sections." Since he knew the Yang Divine King's goal, how could he easily reveal his identity? However, how could the Yang Divine King be fooled? He immediately frowned and revealed an angry expression. He sneered, "Nonsense. You're the strongest person here and the leader of everyone. Not only those ants, but even the 4 sect masters and family heads are extremely respectful to you and follow your lead. Do you think I'm blind?" As he spoke, he waved his hand and shot out a golden light that condensed into a giant golden palm that captured an unlucky Divine Lord. Bam! As he squeezed hard, the Divine Lord exploded on the spot and turned into a bloody pulp that splashed in all directions. Even the Divine Lord's godhead was crushed into powder. Blood, flesh, and mud splattered everywhere and sprayed onto the bodies of the surrounding Divine Lords, dyeing them bloody. An 8th Heaven Realm Divine Lord was so weak in front of the Yank Divine King. He couldn't even withstand a single blow. This sudden scene shocked everyone. They were so scared that their guts and livers were torn apart, and they were trembling in fear. Several Divine Lords were so scared that their faces turned pale and cold sweat broke out on their foreheads. They subconsciously turned around and ran. However, the Yank Divine King didn't chase after them. He waved his hand again and shot out a golden light. Swoosh! A giant golden palm appeared, carrying dozens of laws and divine powers. It descended from the sky and captured a Divine Lord. "Whoever dares to run will end up like him." The Yank Divine King shouted coldly and squeezed another Divine Lord. Blood splattered everywhere. Instantly, the other Divine Lords who were running for their lives were so frightened that they stopped in their tracks and flew back obediently. This was because they could clearly sense that the Yank Divine King had released an invisible divine power that had sealed off the area within a radius of 10,000 miles. They couldn't escape at all. 2 Divine Lords were crushed in a row. The scene was bloody and horrifying. Everyone was terrified and in despair. Yan Tiangang didn't dare to lie anymore. He hurriedly bowed and apologized. "I was foolish. Please calm down, Your Majesty. I'll tell you the truth. I'm the 5th Emperor of the Great Yan Empire. I've long retired behind the scenes and am respected as a patriarch." The Yank Divine King smiled even more happily. "So you're the patriarch of the Great Yan Emperor. That's even better. From now on you're my slaves. If you work for me wholeheartedly, not only will you be spared from death, but you'll also be rewarded by me. If you're disobedient and lazy, I'll kill all of you." Chapter 3248. In order to intimidate Yan Tiangang and the others. As Rock-Ku Divine King said this, he used his giant golden palm to grab a divine monarch who was severely injured and weak. He crushed the divine monarch into a bloody mist on the spot. Since this divine lord wasn't strong enough and wouldn't be of much use, it was better to use him as a warning to others. Bang! A bloody mist blossomed. That divine lord didn't even have time to scream before he turned into a bloody pulp. Yan Tiangang, the 4 sect masters, and the family heads were all covered in blood and looked to be in a sorry state. However, they were afraid and didn't dare to act rashly. They didn't even dare to wipe off the blood. Everyone was filled with fear and despair at the Yank Divine King's strength and brutality. They completely gave up any thoughts of resistance. "We will obey your majesty's orders and serve you loyally." Yan Tiangang tried his best to remain calm and took the lead to bow to show his loyalty. The other 21 divine lords came back to their senses and hurriedly followed his example, bowing to show their allegiance. The Yank Divine King was very satisfied. He nodded with a cold smile and said, "Very good, at least you know what's good for you. Don't cry. It's your honor to be able to serve this king. Not only you but also the forces under your command and the entire Great Yan Empire should feel honored to be able to serve this king. You should know that this king is the ruler of a region. Who knows how many emperors of empires are lining up to serve this king." Hearing this, Yan Tiangang and the other divine lords hurriedly squeezed out smiles that were uglier than crying and loudly said things that went against their will. "It's our honor to be able to serve your majesty." Just like that, 22 divine lords, including Yan Tiangang, became the Yank Divine King's slaves. The Yank Divine King was anxious to find the thief and retrieve the treasure, so he didn't waste any time. He looked at Yan Tiangang, the 4 sect masters, and the family heads and asked them about the situation. "Did any other divine kings enter the Great Yan Empire in the past month?" the Yank Divine King asked with a frown. Yan Tiangang hurriedly replied, "Your Majesty, no. How honorable and dazzling are divine kings. The Great Yan Empire is located in the northernmost region, and there hasn't been a god king for several thousand years." The Yank Divine King's frown deepened as he asked, "However, I can trace the aura of the treasure and confirm that the thief is still in the Great Yan Empire. Let me ask you again. Has there been a god king expert in the Great Yan Empire?" Without waiting for Yan Tiangang and the others to reply, he added, "Let's not talk about the divine kings that were born tens of thousands of years ago. After all, that dog bastard is only a lesser divine king. His foundation is still shallow." After his reminder, not only Yan Tiangang, but the 4 sect masters and patriarchs all answered in unison, "Divine King Azure Jade." Yes. In the past 10,000 years, the Great Yan Empire has only produced one divine King Azure Jade. According to Lord God King, only God King Azure Jade meets the conditions. God King Azure Jade? Yank narrowed his eyes, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. He asked in a low voice, "That name sounds familiar. I seem to have heard of it before. By the way, is the divine King Azure Jade surname Chao?" Yan Tiangang hurriedly nodded and answered with certainty, "Yes. Divine King Azure Jade's surname is Chao. His real name is Chao Qingyu." "It is indeed him." Yank Divine King revealed a sinister smile as his eyes flashed with a cold glint. Seeing his reaction, Yan Tiangang and the 4 sect masters and patriarchs exchanged glances, feeling shocked and worried. Under the eyes of Yank Divine King, they did not dare to discuss through voice transmissions. However, through eye contact, similar thoughts appeared in their minds. Heavens! Divine King Azure Jade is still alive? He actually returned to the Great Yan Empire? I heard Yank Divine King say that Divine King Azure Jade stole his treasure? He fled back to the Great Yan Empire? No wonder this guy came to the Great Yan Empire. So he came to pursue Divine King Azure Jade. It's over. Divine King Azure Jade provoked such a terrifying expert. He will bring a calamity to the Great Yan Empire. Just as the 5 nobles were filled with shock and worry, Yank Divine King asked again, "Since Chao Qingyu is the Great Yan Empire's god, it's only natural that he fled back. Who knows where Chao Qingyu's cave abode is?" There was no need for Yan Tiangang and the other 4 to answer this question. Every divine lord present knew. Immediately, someone scrambled to answer, "Your Majesty, Divine King Azure Jade's cave abode is in the Cloud Sea Mystic Realm in the northwest. 20 days ago we even entered the Azure Jade Palace and just returned from there." Hearing this answer, Yank Divine King was overjoyed. He grinned and said, It's really wise of me to recruit all of you. Kid, I think highly of you. This is your reward." With that, Yank Divine King took out a grayish-brown rock and threw it to that divine lord. That divine lord was overjoyed and hurriedly bent over to receive the rock. He bowed and thanked him excitedly. He used his divine sense to probe the rock and found that it was a special divine stone. It was very precious. Moreover, there was a divine king-level mystic art recorded in the rock. Perhaps this was only a low-grade divine king-level mystic art. Moreover, it was the most common type. However, this was only for divine kings. To all divine lords, it was still a priceless treasure. With this low-grade divine king-level mystic art, as long as one could comprehend it thoroughly, there would be more hope of breaking through to the divine king realm. That Sir God was overjoyed. He kowtowed to express his gratitude. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for bestowing me with this divine king-level mystic art. I am willing to be your slave and listen to your commands. I will be at your beck and call." Previously, the 50 factions had racked their brains and suffered a lot to enter the Azure Jade Palace. In the end, not only did they not get anything, but they also lost so many soldiers and generals. The casualties were so heavy. Now that they had met the Yank Divine King, they would be rewarded with a Divine King-level mystic art if they performed well. This made that Divine Lord extremely excited. He was dead set on following the Yank Divine King as his lackey. The other Sir Gods were envious when they saw this. They were envious and jealous. Therefore, someone immediately shouted, "Your Majesty, I am willing to lead the way to the Azure Jade Palace immediately." The other Divine Lords reacted and shouted in unison, "I also know the way. I am willing to lead the way for your Majesty." It was not just the Divine Lords. Even the 4 sect masters and family heads were eager to give it a try. Seeing this, Yen Tiangang was secretly anxious. However, there was nothing he could do. Sigh. This bunch of bastards who forget righteousness at the sight of profit. They are really blinded by greed. No matter what, Divine King Azure Jade is also a citizen of the Empire and the pride of the Great Yen Empire. Now that the Yank Divine King is here to deal with Divine King Azure Jade, these bastards are willing to be lackeys and accomplices instead of protecting Divine King Azure Jade. Although Yen Tiangang was very angry, he was powerless to stop or refute. This was because he knew that under the temptation of a Divine King-level mystic art and treasure, all Divine Lords would lose their rationality and dignity. In fact, even he was a little tempted. If not for his special status, he would have already. Chapter 3249. The Yank Divine King's threats and promises made many Divine Lords willingly submit. However, not only was he scheming, but he was also very stingy. Even though everyone was eager to show him the way, he had no intention of rewarding them. Only the lucky one at the beginning received a gray rock and was rewarded with a king-level divine ability. The others were mad with jealousy, but there was nothing they could do. They could only work harder and serve the Yank Divine King more diligently in order to be rewarded. Just like that, the Yank Divine King led the 22 Divine Lords and rushed toward the Azure Jade Palace. In any case, he had achieved his goal. There was no need for him to go to the Great Yen capital. He only wanted to reach the Azure Jade Palace as soon as possible, kill Chao Qingyu and take back that supreme treasure. At the entrance of the Azure Jade Palace, the 22 Divine Lords led by Yen Tiangang clustered around the Yank Divine King. They looked like lackeys. The Yank Divine King's sinister laughter resounded through the sky like muffled thunder. However, there was no reaction from the Azure Jade Palace. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao and Ji Ku, who were setting up the divine formation and reinforcing the defensive formation, naturally heard the Yank Divine King's voice. Moreover, the 3 of them released their divine senses to check the situation at the entrance and saw the Yank Divine King Yen Tiangang and the others. The 3 of them immediately changed their expressions. They frowned fiercely with grave expressions. "Damn it! I guessed right. Yeah. That Divine King chasing Chao Qingyu really did find this place. Yen Tiangang and those Divine Lords really deserved to die. They actually became lackeys for that Divine King and brought him here." Yun Yao and Jiku were very angry. They wanted nothing more than to kill Yen Tiangang and the others. Ji Tianxing had long expected that the Yank Divine King would come here. They were mentally prepared. However, the return of Yen Tiangang and the others was beyond their expectations. One Divine King expert was already a headache. Coupled with the 20+ Divine Lords, the Azure Jade Palace's situation was even more dangerous. "Damn it! We've already completed 10 divine formations. We only need 2 more to reinforce the defensive formation. Unfortunately, that damn deity king actually came at this time," Jiku said angrily. Ji Tianxing only used his spiritual sense to look at the situation outside the door, and then concentrated on casting the array. Upon hearing Jiku's words, he replied calmly, "It's fine. Let's ignore those bastards for now and continue setting up the array formation." Yun Yao asked worriedly, "Will that work? How long can the gate of the Celestial Palace last?" Ji Tianxing said in a low voice, "It will take the three of us at least 3 days to complete the last 2 black tortoise divine sealing arrays. Although the array formation at the gate of the Celestial Palace has been modified, if those people attack with all their strength, they definitely won't be able to last for 3 days." When the two women heard this, they became even more worried, and the worry between their brows became even more pronounced. Ji Tianxing comforted, "You don't have to worry too much. Let's just do our best and leave the rest to fate. I'll wake the others up and everyone will cast the array together. Should save a lot of time." In any case, Lin Shui, Bai Long, Nye Feiyun and the others had already been in seclusion for a while. Their mental state and strength should have more or less recovered by now. As expected, after Ji Tianxing took out the divine ship and divine pagoda, and woke everyone up, they all appeared one after another. Swoosh. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Compared to before they went into seclusion, the tiredness on everyone's faces had disappeared, and their energy had also recovered by a lot. After everyone had arrived, Ji Tianxing briefly explained the current situation and the situation they were in. When everyone heard that a deity king had brought Yan Tiangang and the others to the gate of the Celestial Palace, they all felt nervous and anxious. However, when everyone saw Ji Tianxing's calm and collected expression, their hearts calmed down a lot. As long as Ji Tianxing could keep his composure, they would be much more at ease, and their hearts would be filled with confidence. Thus, Ji Tianxing explained his thoughts, plan and method of setting up the array formation to everyone. He arranged everyone's positions and formations, and everyone performed their duties in setting up the divine array. For everyone with the experience of modifying the reincarnation array, setting up the black tortoise god sealing array was not difficult. In any case, they just had to follow Ji Tianxing's instructions and seriously cast the array with all their strength. The real difficulty was that Ji Tianxing could analyze the divine array so thoroughly and understand it so deeply. Soon Ji Tianxing led everyone and began to cast the array formation. At this moment, Yank deity King Yan Tiangang and the others stood outside the Celestial Palace for a while, but there was still no movement and they became a little anxious. "What's going on?" Yank deity King frowned and looked at Yan Tiangang with some displeasure and asked, "Didn't you enter this Celestial Palace and fight inside? Didn't you tell me that there were ferocious beasts guarding the Celestial Palace?" He brought so many divine lords to the gate, and not only did he provoke them with a loud voice, he also deliberately released a powerful divine aura. Logically speaking, the ferocious beasts and deity King Azure Jade in the Celestial Palace should have sensed it long ago. Whether they took the initiative to attack or stubbornly defended, they should have reacted. Yan Tiangang was a little troubled and he hurriedly explained, "Lord Deity King, this old one does not know what's going on. When we left the Celestial Palace, there was indeed a ferocious beast and a human youth helping it. Although we retreated in defeat, that ferocious beast was heavily injured and on the verge of death. Only that human youth's injuries were lighter." "Why did a human youth appear again?" Yank deity King frowned and his expression became even more displeased. The heaven-splitting palace master hurriedly explained, "Lord deity King, that human youth also entered the Celestial Palace to search for treasures. I don't know why he helped that ferocious beast." Yank deity King thought for a moment and asked, "You mean that human youth might also be in the Celestial Palace?" Yan Tiangang hurriedly nodded and said with a cold expression, "It's possible. Of course, this old one also hopes that he is still in the Celestial Palace. If Ji Tianxing was really in the Celestial Palace, then his wish would be granted. Since the Yank deity King was here for revenge, he could kill Ji Tianxing while he was at it and avenge the other factions." Yank deity King waved his hand and said disapprovingly, "No matter who is hiding in the Celestial Palace, they will not be able to escape death today. Since they are cowards and refuse to show themselves, then we will break through this Celestial Palace and kill our way in." After that, Yank deity King ordered everyone, "All of you attack together and break open this door." If Yank deity King acted alone, of course he would do it himself. But it was different now. He had 22 lackeys with him and all of them were eager to perform. Something as trivial as breaking open the door naturally had to be done by his lackeys. Towering Wind Pavilion Master volunteered, "Lord Deity King, we have broken through the defensive formation of the door before. Please wait for a moment, we will immediately open the door for you. After that, towering wind pavilion master flew to the entrance of the celestial palace and began to cast a spell. Heaven-splitting palace master, heaven origin sect master, and Xianxia were not to be outdone, and hurriedly flew over to help. Chapter 3250. Yan Tiangang, Xianxia, and the others were the core members of the Divine Palace's array. Not only were they skilled in array Dao, but they also knew the array before them like the back of their hands. Although the Divine Palace's gate was closed and the defensive array was reactivated, they were confident that they could close the array and open the Divine Palace's gate within 100 breaths. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The 5 experts focused on casting their arts and injected their divine power into the Divine Palace's gate. The array on the Divine Palace's gate revealed its original form after being hit by an external force. Wang. With a muffled sound, a 5-colored array lit up on the Divine Palace's gate. The light was more than half a meter thick and there were thousands of images of dragons and lightning flashing on its surface. It gave off a terrifying energy fluctuation. Yan Tiangang and the others were dumbfounded when they saw it. How is it different? This isn't the defensive array from before. The array changed? And it's even stronger. How can this be? Did Divine King Azure Jade set up a new king-grade array after returning? The 5 experts could see that the defensive formation on the door was completely different from the one before. Its power had increased by several times. This unfamiliar array wasn't something they could break. Even if they were given 100 days, they still wouldn't be able to break it. Divine King Yang frowned when he saw Yan Tiangang and the others standing there with ugly expressions. What's going on? Why aren't you breaking the array? Divine King. Yan Tiangang, Xianxia and the others were about to explain the situation to Divine King Yang. Right at this moment, the dazzling 5-colored light barrier sped up and exploded with a destructive power. The reincarnation killing array was activated. Boom. Boom boom boom. In that instant, the 5-colored light barrier burst forth with tens of thousands of pillars of divine lightning, like a rain of arrows filling the sky, enveloping everyone outside the gate. Not only Yan Tiangang and the others, but Divine King Yang and the 17 divine lords were also swallowed by the lightning. The reincarnation killing array was an intermediate king-grade array. When the formation was at full power, the power of the tens of thousands of lightning pillars was enough to destroy the world within 100,000 miles. However, under the control of the Samsara killing formation, the divine thunder light pillars were only concentrated outside the gate of the Divine Palace, within a radius of 100 miles. One could well imagine the terrifying impact that God King Rock and the numerous divine lords who were enveloped by the pillar of divine lightning was enduring. Bang 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 bang. Several muffled sounds came from the crowd. 7 high divine lords, after being struck by a few dozen bolts of divine lightning, directly exploded and died. His divine body was scorched black like charcoal by the divine lightning, exploding into billions of black pieces, splashing in all directions and scattering in the sea of clouds. The other 10 high divine lords had luckily managed to preserve their lives. However, their divine bodies were also turned into charcoal by the divine lightning and turned into black ashes that filled the sky. The divine spark survived, but cracks appeared on it. The radiance was extremely dim, flickering about. Violent shockwaves carried the 10 heavily damaged godheads and flew toward the sea of clouds in the distance. As for Yan Tiangang, Xianxia and the heaven-splitting divine lord, their situation wasn't much better than those divine lords. Although they managed to preserve their lives, their divine bodies had been destroyed and turned into ashes. Their divine sparks had survived and were only slightly injured. They wouldn't fall unconscious. Even so, Yan Tiangang and the other 4 were still shocked to the point of insanity. They all had the same thought. Is this the power of a king-grade divine array? It's terrifying. The one who was the least injured was Yang God King. Not to mention that he had already reached the 4th level of the Divine King realm and was a medium Divine King. When Yan Tiangang and the others stopped breaking the array and had strange expressions, Divine King Yang had already raised his guard. After all, he wasn't the great Yan Empire or the god of the Northern Heaven region. He had even crossed the ocean to come to the boundless Heaven continent from another continent. In a completely foreign land, he had always been cautious and never acted rashly. Therefore, When the reincarnation killing formation released tens of thousands of lightning pillars, he didn't hesitate to close the bronze armor and protect himself tightly. Then he used all his power and pushed his defense to the extreme. His grayish-brown rocky skin had also turned cold and black, and was 10 times tougher than usual. He put on a defensive posture and was safe even after being hit by more than 2,000 lightning bolts. Other than using a lot of divine power, he didn't suffer any injuries. His stony skin was not damaged at all, and the bronze armor he was wearing was also intact, leaving only a few dozen shallow dents. As long as Divine King Yank spent some time, he would be able to repair the damage on the bronze armor. After a long time, the shock wave that swept tens of thousands of miles dissipated in the sea of clouds. The dazzling light of the divine thunder and the deafening sound of the explosion gradually disappeared. Outside the gates of the divine palace, it was quiet again. The 10 severely injured divine lords only had dim divine sparks left. They all scattered and quickly ran away from the green jade divine palace. What happened next had nothing to do with them. If they insisted on staying, even the slightest ripple of the battle would take their lives. Divine King Yank didn't blame them. He just ignored them. As long as Yan Tiangang and Lei Xianxia didn't run away, he wouldn't be angry. 5 godheads flashing with divine light floated around the rock god king. They seemed to be in a state of shock, fear, and anger. Divine King Yank glanced at them and frowned at the gates of the divine palace. He muttered with a dark expression, "This is a mid-grade king-level divine array? It shouldn't be. With Chao Qingyu's strength, he shouldn't be able to set up this divine array. Plus, when he escaped back to the Great Yan Empire, he was already seriously injured and on the verge of losing consciousness. How could he have the strength to set up a new array?" Divine King Yank didn't care about Yan Tiangang and the others. He just felt that this was very unusual and had to be on guard. In fact, a thought even popped up in his mind. Who set up this divine array? Does Chao Qingyu have helpers? But middle-level divine kings are extremely rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. God King Rock was somewhat hesitant, his expression grave as he pondered. Yan Tiangang, Lei Xianxia and the others were full of worry and anxiety. They couldn't help but say, "Divine King, this is a king-level divine array. It's too powerful. Divine lords like us can't break it. Divine King, please forgive us for being unable to help." The 5 of them only had their divine sparks left. They couldn't do anything. If it weren't for Divine King Yank's power, they would have run away already. They only dared to ask because they wanted to see if Divine King Yank had the confidence to break the death array of Samsara. God King Rock collected his thoughts and waved his hand with a dignified expression. "This is a mid-grade king-level divine formation. It's not something you can touch. Stay here and wait. This king will personally destroy it." Sword pierces the 9 heavens. Sword pierces the 9 heavens. Chapter 3251. Hearing Yank's words, Yan Tiangang and the rest heaved a sigh of relief. As long as they weren't sent to their deaths, they were willing to watch the battle. Yank Divine King walked to the gates of the Divine Palace and used his eye technique ability. Almost every Divine King expert would know 1 or 2 divine eye techniques. With the eye technique ability, one could clearly observe formations and see through concealment and camouflage. Regardless of whether it was setting up, breaking formations, refining pills, or forging artifacts, eye technique ability was indispensable. The grayish-brown pupils of the Rock King's bell-sized eyes immediately shone with golden light. With the support of the eye technique ability, he could immediately see through the half-meter-thick 5-colored light barrier in front of him. It contained more than 280 million meridians. Its structure was incomparably complex. It seemed to be layered on top of each other and fused together. Yank Divine King could confirm that this was a genuine mid-grade king-rank divine formation. Moreover, the method of setting up this divine formation was strange and ingenious. It was something he had never seen before. He stared at the Samsara killing formation without blinking for a full 15 minutes before he could clearly see the overall structure of the formation. His face turned ugly and his eyes narrowed fiercely as he thought to himself, "Damn it. This is definitely not a divine formation set up by Chao Qingyu. I dare to bet my life on it." Forget about him, a low-level divine king. Even if it was this king, it was also impossible to set up such a profound grand array within a month. Could it be that I guessed correctly and Chao Qingyu really found a helper? Moreover, it's a mid-level divine king proficient in formations? If that's the case, then it's troublesome. I'm afraid I won't be able to take back my Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Pill. Thinking of this, Yank Divine King's eyes turned even darker. He was furious and irritable. Only the heavens knew how great of a price he had paid for that Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Pill. It was his only hope of strengthening his bloodline and modifying his divine soul and divine body. It was also his only chance of becoming a high-level divine king. It was no exaggeration to say that the value of that Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Pill was second only to his life and lifetime of cultivation. If he couldn't take it back, he would definitely go mad with anger. Yank took a deep breath and suppressed the rage and anger in his heart. He thought to himself, this king needs to be calm. Even if I have to be cautious, I can't scare myself. It was just a king-level divine formation which didn't mean anything. If I spend more time and effort, I will definitely be able to crack it. After this king breaks open the door and enters the palace, I will act according to the circumstances. If Chao Qingyu really has the help of a mid-level god king, even if I can't defeat him, I can still retreat and escape. Having made up his mind, the Yank god king stopped thinking about it. He stared at the reincarnation killing formation without blinking, concentrating on observing and analyzing it. Although he was a mid-level god king, he could still set up more than 100 mid-level king-grade god formations. However, he would need at least 5 days to complete most of the king-grade mediocre divine arrays. It would take at least 3 days to decipher most mediocre king-grade divine arrays. Of course, the Samsara killing formation in front of him was no ordinary king-grade divine formation. It was more complex, profound, and ever-changing. The Yank God King made up his mind. Even if he had to spend half a month, he had to decipher it. Time passed quietly. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Before he knew it, half a day had passed. The Yank God King stood motionless in front of the door, still observing without blinking. Seeing this, Yan Tiangang, Lei Xianxia, and the others couldn't help but mutter to themselves. The 5 quintessences gathered together and communicated in secret. What's going on? The Yank God King still hasn't found a way to break the formation after so long? I don't know what kind of formation it is, but it's so powerful. I've never seen anything like it in my life. No matter what, we were almost completely wiped out this time. Even if the Yank God King breaks the formation, we won't be able to make up for our losses. Don't worry about it. We fought the Tianqing God King first, then met the tyrant Yank God King. It's already good enough that we're still alive. Suddenly, the towering Wind Pavilion Master saw that Yan Tiangang was silent and asked, "Forefather, why aren't you saying anything? What are you thinking about?" The Heaven-Splitting Hall Master, Lei Xianxia, and the Heaven Origin Sect Master all looked at Yan Tiangang. Yan Tiangang's tone was rather grave as he sent a sound transmission. This old man is thinking of a question. Who set up this defensive divine array? How is it so powerful? Even the Yank God King can't do anything about it? According to the Yank God King, the Azure Jade God King was heavily injured and on the verge of unconsciousness when he fled back to the Great Yan Empire. It's impossible for him to recover from such heavy injuries in a month. The Azure Jade God King is a lesser God King, so it's even more impossible for him to set up this king-grade divine formation. The 4 experts fell silent. Lei Xianxia asked, "You mean that the Azure Jade God King has a helper, most likely a middle God King?" The Heaven-Splitting Hall Master was shocked and said worriedly, "If that's the case, the Yank God King has no chance of winning? If we become his accomplices, won't we be dead for sure?" The 4 experts were filled with worry. Yan Tiangang said solemnly, "No. There are only 2 God Kings in the entire North Heaven region. Only the Region Master is a middle God King. Will the Region Master come here? Obviously not. Therefore, I suspect that the divine formation wasn't set up by a middle God King." The 4 experts were stunned and hurriedly asked, "Other than a middle God King, who else can do it?" Tianxing. Yan Tiangang said this name one word at a time. The 4 experts were dumbfounded and exclaimed in disbelief. "How is that possible? He's also a god monarch. How can he set up a king-grade divine formation? That's not right. It's been more than a month. That guy still hasn't left the divine palace?" Seeing that the 4 experts didn't believe him, Yan Tiangang said solemnly, "Although this answer sounds ridiculous, I also don't dare to believe it. However, after careful consideration, I believe that this is the only answer." Everyone was shocked. After a long silence, the Heaven Origin Sect Master asked, "Ancestor, what do you think we should do?" Yan Tiangang said in a deep voice, Wait. We've already lost so much. As long as we can keep our lives, there's nothing to lose. Wait for the Yank God King to break the formation and kill his way into the Green Jade Palace. The truth is, as I think, the Yank God King will definitely kill Tianxing. At that time, we'll be able to witness the death of Tianxing with our own eyes. It can be considered revenge. The Towering Wind Pavilion Master asked again, what about the Green Jade God King? He'll also be killed by the Yank God King. Won't we also have a share of the credit? Yan Tiangong's tone was somewhat cold. He said in a deep voice, the Green Jade God King is a citizen of the Empire. We shouldn't be accomplices to a villain. However, the Yank God King is powerful. We have no choice but to ask a tiger for its skin. Whether or not we can contribute is secondary. The key is that we have to keep an eye on the Yank God King. Chapter 3252. Yan Tiangong's analysis caused the four experts to be enlightened, and they had an idea in their hearts. Lei Xianxia thought for a moment and asked, Ancestor, is it possible that we can make the Yank Divine King stay and become the great Yan Empire's backer? The moment he said this, Yan Tiangang, the Towering Wind Pavilion Master, the Heaven Origin Sect Master, and the Heaven-Splitting Hull Master were all stunned. After a long period of silence, the Master of the Heaven-Splitting Mansion finally said, Brother Lei, you're dreaming. Who is the Yank Divine King? No matter where he went, he would be an overlord of a region, a domain lord. What can a mere empire do to keep him? Although the Heaven-Splitting Mansion Master's words were unpleasant, it was the truth. Yan Tiangang and the others agreed. Lei Xianxia realized that he had thought too much. Fortunately, his divine body had been destroyed. Otherwise, he would be embarrassed in such an awkward situation. At this point, the five powerhouses had a rough idea in their hearts. Although they couldn't help much, they could just watch the show. Time continued to pass. Soon a day had passed. When night fell, the Yank Divine King, who had been observing the divine array without moving, suddenly let out a long breath. Phew, his tensed nerves finally relaxed. A gratified smile appeared on his gloomy face. It was truly a work of art that excelled the heavens. It was unimaginable. The Divine King who set up this divine array is definitely an array grandmaster. His attainments are so deep that I am amazed. The Rock-Ku Divine King muttered to himself and chuckled. However, my array Dao cultivation isn't low either. I still saw through it in the end. Obviously, the Yank Divine King spent a day and finally understood the structure and operating principle of the Samsara killing array. Although it was only a small step towards successfully breaking the array, it was still worth being happy about. After that, he restrained his mind and started to ponder bitterly as he deduced and probed the method to break the formation. Peace returned to the Divine Palace. Seeing that the Yank Divine King had made progress, Yan Tiangang and the others were relieved and continued to wait quietly. Unknowingly, another day had passed. Yank pondered and deduced for an entire day. Finally, he selected 3 feasible ways to break the array. Therefore, he began to use his array techniques and tried to break the arrays one by one. Swish, swish. His palms, which seemed to be huge and heavy like rocks, waved nimbly, shooting out thousands of beams of divine light into the 5-colored light shield. As the countless divine lights entered the reincarnation killing formation, the power of the formation was affected, and the meridians of the formation became sluggish and blocked. As a result, the divine light of the 5-colored light barrier fluctuated incessantly, and the divine dragon phantom and lightning flashed continuously. The power of the array began to erupt and become very unstable. Yan Tiangang and the others sensed danger and hastily retreated 500 miles away. They were also afraid that if the divine array were to attack again, they would definitely lose their lives. 2 hours, 6 hours. 16 hours later, the power of the reincarnation killing formation went berserk. Divine light flashed chaotically and finally, it burst forth with an attack that could destroy heaven and earth. Swoosh, swish, swish, swish. Thousands of lightning bolts mixed with black blades of death, crimson 9 heaven-glazed flames, icy blue northern dark ice blades, 6 different colored beams of god power poured down like floodwaters, covering an area of 100 miles. The 6 different elemental powers actually merged together, multiplying and multiplying endlessly, their might complementing each other. Yank didn't dare to be careless. He hurriedly stopped trying to break the array and focused on defense. He still activated his bronze armor to protect himself. Furthermore, his stone skin also evolved into a dark gold color, and he used his strongest defensive ability. Boom. Boom boom boom. The destructive six-colored divine light sealed the area within a radius of 100 miles as it continued to bombard the area. In just 20 breaths, Yang had been attacked more than 3,000 times. No matter how strong his defense was, he still suffered this time. After all, the 6 types of terrifying divine powers simulated the 6 paths of reincarnation and possessed boundless power and profundity. More than a dozen wash-basin-sized holes and more than 30 cracks appeared on Yang's bronze armor. 4 wounds also appeared on his dark gold skin, and gray blood continuously flowed out. His blood was very strange. It was gray in color and as viscous as mud. Even though this was a unique inherited bloodline of the Yan clan. But Yang knew that this was also the reason why the Yan clan's descendants were destined to be unable to become high-level god kings. It was also because of this that he did everything he could to obtain the Wind Thunder Soul Cleansing Pill at all costs. After a long while, the brilliance of the 6 paths of reincarnation finally dissipated. The reincarnation killing array calmed down. Yang hurriedly checked the situation. His face fell and he was filled with disappointment. This was because the divine power he had injected into the array in the past 16 hours had all been expelled. The first method to break the array had clearly failed. This divine array is indeed extraordinary. Yang murmured, but he wasn't discouraged. He continued to try the second method. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. This time he used a different method. He continuously injected dazzling divine lights into the reincarnation killing array. At the same time, within the Green Jade Palace, Ji Tianxing led Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others to set up the array for 2 days and 8 hours. The continuous high-intensity spell casting and setting up the array at all costs exhausted everyone. Their faces were pale and they were drenched in sweat. Not only were they mentally exhausted, but they had also used up more than half of their energy. They were quite weak. Fortunately, the last 2 miniature black tortoise god sealing arrays were successfully integrated into the defensive array. With everyone's help, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku completed the task ahead of time. The 12 black tortoise god sealing arrays were integrated into different positions and combined with the defensive array. Immediately a change occurred. The defensive array that enveloped 100 miles of heaven and earth exploded with dazzling divine light. It shook violently and fluctuated. Layers of giant waves seemed to have been set off on the surface of the 5-colored sky curtain, and all kinds of mysterious scenes appeared. Divine light shone brightly and divine power surged vigorously. There were even thousands of lightning bolts, zidian, and phantoms of the divine dragon and black tortoise flashing and appearing in the sky curtain. Such a magnificent scene made Lin Shui, Zhenhong, Niafeiyun, and the others exclaim in amazement. They were all dazzled. Under everyone's gaze, the 12 black tortoise god sealing arrays were connected to each other and released billions of divine light lines. They shuttled back and forth in the 5-colored sky curtain, weaving even more complicated patterns. Following this change, the grade and power of the 5-colored sky curtain were continuously increasing. Everything went smoothly, just as Ji Tianxing had expected. In just a few short minutes, the defensive array had completed its transformation. Its grade had increased by 1 level, and it had become the black tortoise god sealing array. Although it was still a low-grade king divine array. However, among the